The laughter started before Ren Holt's boots even touched the platform. Train smoke rolled low over the depot yard, black and bitter, mixing with the smell of wet timber, horse sweat and hot iron. Rain tapped the brim of every hat gathered beneath the station roof, but not hard enough to scatter the townsfolk who had come to see what kind of woman a lonely mountain man could afford by mail. The contract in the station master's hand was already creased from being passed around. Bride delivery confirmed. Paid in full. No refunds after acceptance. Someone read that last line aloud, and the men by the freight crates laughed so hard one of them slapped his knee. A woman in a feathered bonnet covered her mouth, not to hide shame, but delight. A boy climbed onto a barrel for a better look. Then Ren stepped down. She was not delicate, she was not small, she was not the pale, frightened little bride the town had expected to see stumble from the eastbound train with a valise in one hand and terror in the other. Ren Holt stood taller than nearly every man on the platform, broad through the shoulders, full through the waist, with strong hands, a weather-browned face, and calm grey eyes that had learned not to lower themselves for anyone. For one breath. The depot went silent. Then a man near the hitching rail muttered, "Lord above, they sent him a draft horse." The laughter came back meaner. Ren did not flinch. She only tightened her grip on her carpet bag and looked past them, toward the single man standing under the edge of the roof with a soaked hat in his hand. Elias Cord was shorter than she had imagined. Not just shorter than Ren, shorter than most men, narrow-boned, wiry, with a beard trimmed close against a lean jaw and shoulders that looked built by work rather than size. His coat was patched at one elbow, his boots were clean but old. He stood very still while the whole town waited to see if he would be ashamed. The station master lifted the contract like a judge raising a sentence. "Well, Cord," he called, "you ordered a wife. Question is, are you taking delivery?" Elias looked at Ren, then at the laughing crowd, then at the contract. He walked forward, took the paper from the station master's hand, folded it once, and put it inside his coat. "She's not freight," he said. Only 4 words, but the room of open mouths had no answer. Ren Holt heard those words over the rain, over the train hissing behind her, over all the cruel names she had carried from one end of the country to the other. She did not yet know why Elias Cord had written the letter that brought her here. She did not know why his hands trembled when he touched the contract. She did not know why the banker watching from across the muddy street suddenly stopped smiling. But she knew this much. The little mountain man had just chosen her in front of a town that wanted him to refuse. And somewhere inside his folded contract was a dangerous line neither of them had read closely enough. By dusk, the rain had turned the main street of Mercy Ridge into a brown trough of wagon ruts and hoofprints. Ren followed Elias through it without being asked, her carpet bag heavy in her left hand, her hat pinned low against the weather. The town did not let her pass quietly. Folks stared from the mercantile porch, from the dressmaker's window, from the steps of the whitewashed church where Sunday handshakes could turn into Monday cruelty without any change in the preacher's smile. A young woman, vague capite hat yellow curls, leaned out from under the awning of the general store and whispered loudly, "Maybe he needed someone tall enough to stack his firewood." Another voice answered, "Or lift him into bed." The women laughed first. Then the men. Ren kept walking. She had learned long ago that answering every insult only gave small souls a second helping. Silence carried well, could shame people more than shouting, but silence had weight. By the time she reached the end of the boardwalk, Ren felt every word pressing between her shoulder blades like cold fingers. Elias heard it too. She could tell by the way the muscles tightened along his jaw. Yet he did not turn to defend himself. He did not puff up, did not reach for pride he did not own. He only moved one step closer to the muddy street, placing his body between Ren and the porch without making a show of it. It was a small thing. Ren noticed. At the hitching post waited a buckskin mule hitched to a wagon with a patched canvas cover. The wagon bed held sacks of flour, a coil of rope, crate of nails, 2 iron hinges, a wrapped bundle of stovepipe, and 3 lengths of rough-cut pine. Everything had been tied down with the care of a man who could not afford to lose a single item on a mountain road. Elias lifted Ren's carpet-bag before she could object, but he staggered half an inch under the weight. "Mott can carry that," she said. "Mott, no." He set it carefully in the wagon, not because he had proven he was stronger, but because he had meant to help and was honest enough not to pretend otherwise. Ren glanced at the supplies. "You re-repairing something?" "Cabin roof. Smoke drawer. Door frame." All at once, Winter S., impatient. That was the longest answer he had given since the depot. Ren studied him while he checked the harness. Elias Cord moved with quiet precision. He did not waste gesture or breath. His hands were scarred from old cuts, one knuckle crooked from a break badly set. The left side of his face bore a faded line that ran from below his ear into his beard, pale against the weathered brown of his skin. Not handsome in the way women described men in letters, but steady. There was a difference. She had received his first letter 4 months earlier in a boarding-house kitchen in St. Joseph, where steam from boiled linens fogged the windows, and a woman named Mrs. Bell-charged widows, runaways, and unmarried girls too much for beds that smelled of damp straw. The letter had been plain. No poetry. No promises of silks, church socials, or easy living. Mort have land in the North Ridge above Mercy Valley. It is rough, cold, and not forgiving. Mort need a wife who knows work and does not scare easy. Mort will not ask a woman to make herself small to suit me. Mort believe 2 people can make each other stronger without either one having to shrink. Ren had read that sentence 12 times, without either one having to shrink. It was a foolish sentence to trust. She knew that. Men often wrote nobly when ink cost less than behaviour. But no one had ever put into words the things she had spent her life wishing were true. So she had answered. She had told him her height because hiding it would be useless. She had told him she was stronger than most women and heavier than fashion liked. She had told him she could keep accounts, judge livestock, mend harness, smoke meat, patch roofs badly enough to survive a season, and read a contract better than many men who signed them. She had not told him everything. No woman sent all her scars in the first letter. The marriage papers had followed. Then the train ticket. Then the sealed note from the bride agency warning her that frontier men could refuse delivery if the woman misrepresented herself. Ren had not misrepresented herself. Still, standing in Mercy Ridge with half the town laughing and Elias Cord barely reaching her shoulder, she understood the cruelty of expectation. Truth on paper did not always survive the sight of a woman in real life. Elias climbed onto the wagon seat and held the reins. Roads steep. We look make the lower creek before dark if the mud allows. Ren stepped up beside him. The wagon springs dipped sharply under her weight. A boy near the water trough brayed like a mule. Ren sat still. Elias turned his head. Not much. Just enough. The boy stopped. Elias had not said a word, but something in his eyes made the child remember he had chores somewhere else. The wagon rolled north out of town. For a while there was only the sucking pull of mud, the creak of axles, the plod of the buckskin mule, and the sound of Mercy Ridge fading behind them. The valley widened past the last houses, opening into late autumn fields, stubbled verkepite hut, dead grass, and blackened sunflower stalks. Beyond them rose the mountains, dark blue under the rain, their ridges layered like folded wool. Ren had seen mountains before, but not like these. These did not decorate the horizon. They waited. Elias kept his eyes on the road. You can say it. Say what? That Mott met not what the agency described. Ren looked at him. They described you as a landowner of sound moral habits. Verkepite had a strong constitution. His mouth twitched once. It might have been the beginning of a smile, or the memory of one. Did they mention No, they done tea. Bad for business. Ren watched rain gather on the brim of his hat and fall in steady drops. Did they mention large in mine? Yes. She turned toward him. He kept looking ahead. They wrote tall, capable, broad-built, plain-featured, no known illness, literate, obedient if kindly handled. The last words struck her harder than the laughter had. Obedient if kindly handled. Ren felt her face go cold. Elias seemed to feel the air change beside him. Mort de Nerta write that? Mort no. I wouldn't have paid for it. Paid for what? A woman described like livestock. The wagon wheels bumped over a stone. Ren braced her hand against the seat, and Elias instinctively reached as if to steady her, then stopped before touching her without permission. That, too, she noticed. Ren looked out at the wet fields. But you paid. For a wife. He was quiet long enough that the mule's harness bells counted 10 steps. For a chance, he said. The answer settled between them. Neither pretty nor false. A chance was not love. It was not safety. It was not trust. But it was more honest than most offers Ren had received. The road climbed after the last fenced pasture. Pines crowded closer, their branches dripping, the air sharpened with the smell of sap and wet stone. Once the wagon passed a burned cabin foundation half swallowed by weeds. Ren saw the black ribs of rafters pointing at the sky and a rusted stove collapsed in the ash. Fire? She asked. 3 winters ago. Anyone in... Elias' hands tightened on the reins. My brother. Ren did not speak. There were griefs a stranger had no right to touch. The mule strained as the road narrowed, and Elias climbed down to walk beside the wagon on the steepest grade. Ren stepped down too. He looked up at her. You can ride. Mort can walk. Road gets worse. So do people. This time the smile almost reached his eyes. They walked side by side in the rain, the wagon crawling behind the mule. Ren's skirt gathered mud along the hem. Her boots were sturdy, but the mountain road was no proper road, only a scar cut through pine roots and shale. Twice Elias stopped to move fallen branch. Once Ren reached one first, lifted it clear with both hands, and tossed it aside before he could help. Elias looked at the branch, then at her. What? She asked. No, but his tone had changed. Not softened. Exactly. Measured anew. As the light thinned, they reached a bend where the trees opened toward a valley below. Mercy Ridge lay far behind them, its windows shining weakly through the rain. From that height, the town looked harmless, almost gentle. Ren knew better. Most cruel places looked peaceful from far enough away. At the bend stood a leaning signpost marked with 3 routes. One pointed back to Mercy Ridge. One pointed west toward a mining trail. One pointed higher into the North Ridge. Fresh paper had been nailed over Elias' road marker. The notice had already soaked at the edges, but the bold print remained clear. Claim under review. All trespassers subject to removal pending survey and debt settlement. Ren stopped. Elias had gone very still. The rain clicked on the paper. Somewhere in the trees, a crow gave a harsh, lonely call. Ren stepped closer to the notice. This is new. Elias did not answer. She read the lower line, where the ink had begun to bleed. Filed by authority of Harlan Voss, Mercy Ridge Bank and Land Office. Voss, she said. The man in the black coat across from the depot? Elias nodded once. Is your land in debt? No. Taxes unpaid? No. Boundary not since my father marked. Ren studied the nail heads. New iron. Driven deep. The paper was thick enough for official filing, but the seal at the bottom had blurred badly in the rain. Too badly for a notice supposedly posted that morning. She reached up and touched the corner. Elias caught her wrist before she could tear it down. Not hard, but fast. "Don't," he said. Ren looked at his hand around her wrist. He released her immediately. "Sorry." She did not step back. "Why not?" "Because Voss wants me angry. Angry men make mistakes in front of witnesses. There are no witnesses. There are always witnesses in towns like this. Even trees repeat things if a banker pays the right man." Ren looked again at the paper. "What debt settlement?" "The one he invented after my brother died." There it was. Not the whole truth, but the edge of it. The mountains seemed to grow darker around them. Ren could feel the cold moving through her wet sleeves. The legal notice fluttered weakly under the rain, nailed over the road like a warning and an insult. "Did you bring your deed?" she asked. Elias looked up at her. "Of course Mott did." "In a tin box under the bed." "At the..." "Yeah." Ren looked toward the higher road. "Then we should reach that cabin before someone else decides to look under your bed." For the first time since the depot, Elias did not move right away. He stood under the dripping pines, small against the mountain, his face half-shadowed beneath his hat. The scar on his jaw looked paler in the fading light. In his expression Ren saw something she understood too well. A man who had fought so long alone that help looked almost like danger. Finally, he turned to the wagon. "Best climb back up. Mott told you Mott can walk, wasn't he?" He nodded toward the mule. Ren followed his gaze. The buckskin had planted its feet, ears forward, body rigid. Its nostrils flared toward the bend ahead where the road vanished between two walls of pine. Elias reached slowly for the rifle under the wagon seat. Ren listened. At first she heard only rain and the soft ticking of cooling harness leather. Then came another sound, a faint scrape. Not wind, not branch, metal against stone. Elias lifted the rifle and stepped in front of Ren before she could stop him. She did not like being put behind anyone, but she understood cover, and there were moments when pride could get a body killed. The scrape came again. A figure moved between the pines ahead. Then another. Two men stood in the road, their faces hidden under low hat brims, rain shining on the barrels of their shotguns. One of them held up a lantern even though dusk had not fully fallen. The yellow light swung over the wagon, over Elias, then climbed slowly up Ren S-frame as if measuring the joke the town had been telling all afternoon. Well, now the man with the lantern called. Banker said Cord was bringing home a bride. The other man cocked his shotgun. Didn't say she'd be big enough to bury him herself. Elias raised his rifle. The lantern man smiled. Road S closed. Cord. Claim under review. This road is mine. Not to. Rain ran down Ren's neck and into her collar. Her hands were empty. Her bag was in the wagon. Her new husband stood before her with a rifle and a contract in his coat, and two armed men blocked the only road to the cabin where his deed lay waiting in a tin box under the bed. Then behind them, from lower on the road, came the slow creak of another wagon. Ren turned. A third lantern appeared in the rain. They were trapped between them. Elias did not look back, but his voice came low and flat. Ren. It was the first time he had said her name. She stepped beside him instead of behind him. The men in the road laughed at that. And then, from somewhere beyond the trees, a bull bellowed with such rage that even the armed men stopped smiling. The bull came out of the pines like the mountain had torn loose a piece of itself and given it horns. He was black except for a jagged white blaze down his face, mud up to his knees, steam bursting from his nostrils in the cold rain. One length of broken fence rail dragged from a rope tangled around his neck, knocking against stones and roots with every furious swing of his head. His left flank was streaked Vekepte hat blood where the rail had scraped him raw. The lantern man cursed and stumbled back. The mule screamed. Elias's rifle shifted toward the animal, then froze, because the bull was not merely loose. He was terrified. A terrified animal that size could crush a wagon, split a man open, or send a mule and bride and mountain man over the side of the ridge before anyone fired a second shot. "Don't shoot," Ren said. The words came out calm, but they cracked through the road like a command. Elias glanced up at her. He'll charge. He already wants to. A gunshot will make sure of it. The bull swung his head again. The rail struck a boulder and splintered. He bellowed so hard the sound seemed to shake rain from the branches. One of the men blocking the road lifted his shotgun at both hands, his face white beneath the brim of his hat. "Put that down," Ren called. He aimed anyway. Ren moved before Elias could stop her. She stepped away from the wagon, not toward the bull and not away from him, but at a slant, slow and wide, giving the animal her side instead of her chest. Her hands rose open, palms loose. The rain ran down her sleeves. Her skirt clung heavy to her legs. Every person on that mountain road stared as if she had lost her senses. "Ren," Elias said, low and hard. She did not look back. "Hold the mule." The bull's head snapped toward her. Ren stopped moving. "That's it," she murmured, voice deep and steady. "Mort see you. You poor angry king. Mort see you." The men laughed nervously at first, but the laughter died when the bull took one heavy step toward her. Elias gripped the mule's bridle. The animal jerked and fought him, eyes rolling, but Elias held on with both hands and all the strength in his small body. The wagon creaked behind him. A flour sack slid against the crate of nails. The third lantern from below had stopped. Whoever held it was watching too. Ren kept her eyes low, not directly in the bull's gaze. She watched his shoulders. She watched the rope. She watched the drag of the broken rail. There was always a reason an animal turned dangerous. Pain. Fear. A bad hand. A fence too weak for the weight it claimed to hold. Her father had taught her that before he drank himself into a grave, back when the Holt farm still had a barn with red paint on the door and 12 head of cattle in winter store, back before neighbours decided a tall, broad girl with a man's shoulders was useful until she wanted wages, respect, or a chair that did not creak under her. The bull pawed the mud. Ren breathed out slow. The rope around his neck had caught under the splintered end of the rail. Every time he moved, it twisted tighter. If he charged, he would strangle himself before he killed somebody else. She looked around without turning her head. The road narrowed between a rock bank and a ditch full of rainwater. To the right stood a half-fallen pine, its lower branches dead and bare. To the left, Elias' wagon. Behind her, 3 armed men who might be cowards, thieves, or hired fools, but none of them mattered as much as the animal in pain. "Elias," she said. He answered from behind her, voice tight. "Here. Do you have grain in the wagon?" "Oh, yeah. Open the sack. Don't throw it. Just pour a little in the road behind me. The men are less likely to shoot if the bull is between us and them." A pause. Then she heard him move. The man with the lantern barked. "Cord, you touch that wagon and mot le." The bull swung his head toward the voice. The man shut his mouth. Good, Ren thought. There were times when size was not a shame. There were times when it was shelter. A broad body could block wind. A tall frame could reach a beam. A strong hand could pull a calf from a ditch, hold a rope, carry water, lift grief out of a corner where smaller people had left it. She took another slow step. The bull snorted. "That's it," she whispered. "You don't want us. You want free." Behind her, oats pattered softly into the mud. The bull's ears flicked. Ren eased the soaked shawl from her shoulders. It was brown wool, heavy with rain. She lowered it in one hand and let it drag lightly. The bull watched the movement, nostrils flaring. She moved the shawl left. Not fast. Just enough. His head followed. She stepped right. The rope line showed. Knife, she said. Elias was already there. Not beside her. Not in front of her, but close enough that she felt the heat of his body in the rain. He held a short hunting knife handle first. She took it without looking. Stay back, she said. Mot a, you re-not. Mort met back in. It was the wrong moment to laugh, but something in her chest almost did. She swallowed it down and bent her knees. The bull lowered his head. Ren lowered hers less. He lunged. Not all the way. A warning, a brutal thrust of horn and shoulder that splashed mud across her skirt. Ren stepped aside with a speed no one expected from a woman her size. The horn caught the edge of the shawl and ripped it from her hand. The bull shook it once, furious, then paused as the scent of oats reached him. Ren moved in. Elias made a sound. Not quite her name and not quite a prayer. She caught the dragging rope with her left hand, wrapped it once around her wrist, and leaned her weight back hard. The bull jerked, but the twist of the rope checked his head just enough. Ren drove the knife under the knot and sawed with short, ugly strokes. The rope was swollen with rain. The bull bellowed. "Hold!" Elias shouted. Though whether to Ren, the mule, or the whole world, she could not tell. The hired man with the shotgun stumbled backward into the ditch. His weapon went off. The blast tore through branches overhead. The mule reared. The wagon lurched. Elias slammed his shoulder against the animal's neck and hung on. One of the lanterns dropped, hissing in the mud. The bull surged forward. Ren went down on one knee. The rope burned her palm. The knife slipped. She caught it again, teeth clenched, and pulled with everything in her back and hips, not fighting the bull's strength, only turning it half an inch away from her ribs. "Easy," she growled. "Easy, you great fool." The rope snapped. The broken rail fell free. The bull staggered, stunned by the sudden absence of pain. For one terrible second Ren was directly beneath his head, close enough to smell blood, wet hide, and the sour stink of terror. Then Elias was beside her, one hand gripping the back of her bodice, not pulling her down, but giving her a point to rise from. Ren shoved up. The bull tossed his head, snorted, and charged past them toward the oats. Nobody moved. Rain fell. The bull dropped his muzzle to the road and began eating as if nothing in the world had ever been wrong. Ren stood with mud on her knees, blood on her sleeve, and Elias' knife still in her hand. The man in the ditch stared at her. The lantern man whispered, "Devil take me." Ren looked at him. He might. But the bull won tea if you stop waving guns at him. Elias turned his rifle back toward the men. The moment of wonder ended. "Move off my road," he said. The lantern man swallowed, trying to recover the shape of authority. "This road is under claim review. That notice was posted by a banker, not a judge. Bank owns the debt. There is no debt." The third lantern behind them came closer. A wagon rolled into view from the lower road, drawn by 2 bay horses. On the seat sat Harlan Voss himself, dry beneath a black oilskin coat, his hat brim shining in the rain. He was a handsome man in the way sharp knives were handsome, all clean lines and polished surfaces. Even the mud seemed reluctant to touch him. Beside him sat Deputy Lyle Pritch, a round-faced man with a badge pinned to his vest and worry tucked into every fold of his expression. Voss looked first at the bull, then at Ren, then at the cut rope hanging from her burned hand. "Well," he said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes, Mrs. Cord is already making herself useful. Ren felt the word strike. Mrs. Cord. She had signed papers in an agency office 3 states away. She had worn no wedding dress. Elias had not placed a ring on her finger. No preacher had spoken over them. Yet here on a wet mountain road, with guns and notices and bankmen watching, the name had weight. Elias stepped closer to her, but still not in front. Why are your men armed on my road? Voss? My men? Voss looked. Mr. Abel and Mr. Rusk are assisting the bank in protecting disputed property from unlawful removal of assets. Assets, Ren repeated. Voss' gaze slid to her. Timber. Livestock. Tools. Documents. Anything that may be subject to settlement. The bull is yours. Belongs to a client. He was tangled in bad fencing. Mort met sure animals don't respect legal boundaries. Neither do bankers. It seems. Deputy Pritch coughed into his fist as if trying to hide a smile, then stopped when Voss turned his head. Elias said, Mort want that notice removed. Mort met afraid that would be unwise. Voss reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document sealed in red wax. The bank has petitioned for review of your father's original claim based on unpaid obligations attached to the Cord estate and unresolved title questions following the death of your brother, Silas Cord. The rain seemed colder after the name was spoken. Ren looked at Elias. His face had closed. Voss saw it and pressed gently. Politely. Cruelly. Tragic matter. That fire. A great many records lost. A great many questions left behind. My deed wasn't lost, Elias said. So you Mott had. Then bring it to the land office tomorrow by noon, along with proof that all notes against the property were satisfied before Silas died. Elias' jaw tightened. There were no notes. Voss unfolded the paper just enough for the red seal to show. The county court may disagree. Court S 3 days away. Emergency petition. Filed this afternoon. Ren felt the shape of the trap. Post the notice at dusk. Block the road. Force Elias into anger. Into a shot. Into some act that could be called resistance. Then use the law to make theft look clean. She had seen men like Voss before. Not always bankers. Sometimes mill owners. Sometimes church trustees. Sometimes relatives with soft voices and hard hands. They did not need to shout. They had papers for that. Elias lowered his rifle and in. Not in surrender. In thought. Voss' eyes flickered with satisfaction. Ren noticed that too. She stepped forward. May Mort see the petition? Voss blinked, then smiled wider. Mort met afraid bank documents are not entertainment. Mrs. Cord. Mort Donty entertain easily. A quiet snort came from Deputy Pritch before he could stop it. Voss ignored him. Your husband may come tomorrow. He can read. I should hope. So can Mort. The rain drummed on the canvas wagon cover. For the first time, Voss studied her not as spectacle, not as joke, but as inconvenience. How fortunate for Mr. Cord, he said. A literate bride. Ren held his gaze. More fortunate than a dishonest banker. The hired men stiffened. Elias' eyes cut to her. Sharp with warning, but not anger. Voss's smile stayed in place. Only his nostrils thinned. Take care. You renew here. Moth been new in worse places. Voss folded the document slowly. Then understand this quickly. Mercy Ridge respects order. Debts are settled. Boundaries are honoured. Loose animals are penned. Loose tongues do not prosper. Ren felt the burn in her palm pulse. Elias said, Threaten my wife again and you look like need a deputy who likes paperwork. Deputy Pritch shifted uncomfortably. Voss looked at Elias for a long moment. Something old passed between them. Something Ren could not name. Hatred. Yes, but hatred they kept a hat. Mortlaglung expect you at noon, Voss said. He lifted the reins. The hired men moved aside. Not gracefully. Abel climbed from the ditch with mud to his waist. Russ kept glaring at Ren as if her existence had ruined his evening. The bank wagon turned awkwardly in the narrow road and started back down toward Mercy Ridge. Lantern swinging. The bull kept eating oats. Only when the last lantern disappeared did Elias lower his rifle. Ren let out a breath she had not realized she held. "Your hand," he said. She looked down. Blood and rope burn crossed her palm in angry lines. "It's nothing. It's open. Mot V had worse. That does tea close." He took a strip of clean cloth from his coat pocket. Not a handkerchief for show. A bandage. Folded and ready. He held it out rather than taking her hand. Ren gave him the wounded palm. His fingers were careful. He wrapped the cloth with the practiced efficiency of a man who had dressed injuries alone in bad weather. He did not fuss. Did not scold. Did not make her bravery into foolishness. He only worked. "That bull could they've killed you," he said. "So could those—" "Yeah." The bull had a reason. His eyes lifted to hers. There it was again. That almost smile, though this one was sadder. And Mendon tea. They do. That does to make them less guilty. He tied the bandage. No. The word carried more than agreement. Ren wondered how many reasons Elias Cord had been given by men who harmed him. How many papers? How many explanations? How many lawful cruelties wearing clean collars? The mule had calmed enough to move, though its sides still trembled. Elias gathered the oats back as best he could, then freed the road of the broken rail. Ren approached the bull slowly, speaking under her breath. The animal watched her but did not charge. With the rope gone, he looked less like a monster and more like a massive creature ashamed of his own fear. "Whose bull?" she asked. "Barlow-S." "Likely," Elias said. "Ranch south of town." "Does Barlow bank with Voss?" "Everyone banks with Voss if they want credit." Nothing in Mercy Ridge is convenient by accident. They left the bull in a pocket of meadow grass beside the road. Elias said he would send word to Barlow in the morning, if Voss did not twist the tail first. Ren knew he would. Men like Voss never wasted an event that could be reshaped into accusation. The climb after that was slower. Night came fully. Rain softened to mist and the mountains drew close around the wagon. The road narrowed until branches scraped the canvas cover with long whispering fingers. The mule's hooves found stone more often than mud. Somewhere hearty Gerhardt above, water ran unseen over rock. The air smelled of pine pitch, wet leaves, and snow waiting its turn. Ren's hand throbbed. Her shoulders ached from the train. The walk. The bull. The weight of being watched. Yet beneath the pain ran something she had not expected to feel on her first evening in a strange mountain. Usefulness, not gratitude. She did not need praise for cutting a rope, but no one had told her to sit aside. No one had shoved her into the wagon and called it protection. Elias had argued with danger, not with her competence. Even when he had stepped in front at first, he had moved aside when the work became hers. That mattered. They passed between two standing stones Elias called the Sisters, then crossed a narrow bridge made from pine trunks flattened on top. Ren looked down and saw white water flashing below, swollen by rain. "Bridge needs shoring," she said. "Yes." "Before wind." "Yes." "You have help." "No." She glanced at him. He kept his eyes forward. The cabin appeared less than a mile later, or rather faint glow from its window appeared first, a small amber square tucked among black pines at the edge of a clearing. The sight of it stirred an ache Ren had not prepared for. A single lit window could lie to a person. It could promise welcome where there was only work, warmth where there was only smoke, belonging where there was only a roof someone else might take away. Still, after the depot and the road and Voss paper, that light looked brave. The cabin itself was larger than she expected but rougher than any bride agency would admit. It had been built of squared logs chinked vekepite hat clay and moss, with a stone chimney leaning slightly at the west wall. The roof sagged near one corner under old snow damage. A woodshed stood half. A small barn leaned beyond the yard, its door patched with mismatched boards. A fenced pen, broken in 2 places, held no animals but showed sign that goats or calves had once been kept there. Beyond the clearing, the land sloped toward dark timber. Ren could hear water somewhere close. "Spring house?" she asked. Elias looked surprised. Down the draw. He pulled the wagon near the porch. "You notice what matters." Motvi slept places where water mattered more than kindness. He said nothing to that. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke, beans, dried herbs, old leather and cold corners. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, a stove with a blackened pipe, shelves of tools and tin plates, a rifle rack, a stack of split wood, and a narrow bed built into the far wall. A loft ran above the back half of the room, reached by a ladder. There was a second small room through a hanging blanket, likely storage or sleeping space. Everything was clean. Not pretty. Not soft. But clean. Ren stood just inside the door, too large for the room in a way she had learned to feel before anyone said it. Her shoulders nearly brushed the hanging herbs. Her head came close to one roof beam. She saw Elias notice that, then notice himself noticing. He took off his hat. "Mot day dana to build it for someone your height. Mot di dana marry you for your rafters." The sentence came out before she could soften it. Elias looked at her. Then he laughed. It was not loud, and it did not last, but it changed the cabin. The sound moved into the dry corners and made them less cold. Ren's own mouth curved despite herself. He turned away first, almost embarrassed by the laughter. "You can have the bed. Mot luglung take the floor." He looked back. "I want to start this arrangement by putting you on your own floor," she said. "Is that the loft?" "Yes, but the ladder es narrow." Motvi climbed worse. "It es cold. Mot own a shawl with a bullhole in it." Cold and Mot are acquainted. He studied her vekepite hat that measured look again. There's another cot behind the blanket. Belonged to Silas. The name entered the room like smoke that would not draw properly. Ren softened her voice. "Mot can use that. It es stored. Mot luglunk set it up. We'll set it." He did not argue. That was new enough to feel like a door opening. They unloaded the wagon by lantern light. Ren carried the pine boards 2 at a time until Elias quietly took one end of the last pair, not because she needed him, but because 2 people carrying together was less lonely than one proving a point. They stacked flour in a tin-lined chest. Nails went into a coffee can, hinges onto the tool shelf, stovepipe near the hearth. When Ren lifted the crate of nails down, something slid beneath the wagon seat and struck the floorboards with a dull slap. A leather folder. Elias went still. Ren looked at it. "Yours?" "Yeah." He picked it up too fast. She saw the edge of paper inside. Not the marriage contract. Something older. Something with a blue ribbon and a dark stain along one corner. Elias tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. Ren did not ask. Not yet. A marriage made by letters had no right to every secret on the first night. They ate beans and salt pork at the table while rain tapped the roof in uneven places. A pot had been kept warm on the stove, though how Elias had managed that while fetching her from town she did not know until she saw the older woman's touch in the neat cloth over the bread and the small jar of apple butter set beside it. "Neighbour?" she asked. "Mrs. Vale. Lives 2 miles east. Widowed. Brings bread when she thinks Motmet forgetting to be human." "Is she right?" Ren spread apple butter thinly over bread. "Does she know vekep about me?" "Yeah." What did she say? That Mort should sweep the corners and not talk like Mort met negotiating a mule purchase. Did you? Swept the corner. Ren looked around the room. And the talking? Mort met learned. The quiet that followed was not uncomfortable. That surprised her more than anything. Usually silence around strangers felt like a test she was failing. With Elias, silence was simply where words rested when they were not needed. After supper, he set her bandaged hand under the lamplight and unwound the cloth. The burns had stopped bleeding but looked angry. Needs salve, he said. Mort have some in my bag. He raised an eyebrow. You brought salve? And needles. Thread. Ginger root. Feverfew. A whetstone. 2 account books. My father S. cattle notes. 3 letters I should have burned. And a blue dress Mott hate. That all? A tin of peppermint drops. She fetched the salve herself. He watched how she cleaned the burn before dressing it. And she watched him watching. Not with suspicion. With attention. You've tended stock, he said. Yeah, and men, when they deserve. Hard line to judge. Not always. He accepted that. When the hand was wrapped again, Elias rose and crossed to the bed. He knelt, reached beneath the frame, and dragged out a tin box with a dented lid and a small iron lock. The sound of it against the floorboards made Ren sit straighter. He took a key from a cord around his neck. My deed, he said. The lock opened with a click. Inside lay folded papers wrapped in oilcloth. A few coins. A faded photograph of 2 young men standing beside an older couple, and a small brass compass with a cracked glass face. Elias removed the oilcloth bundle and set it on the table between them. Ren did not touch it. He noticed. You can. No. She looked up. His face was honest in the lamplight. Tired. Guarded. But honest. Mott don't like handing my life to someone Mott met today, he said. But Voss is counting on that. He's counting on me standing alone because Mott always have. Ren felt something inside her grow quiet. And you don't want to do what he counts on. She reached for the papers. The deed was old but legible, recorded to Thomas Cord, then transferred in inheritance to Elias and Silas Cord jointly, with survivorship rights marked in careful county script. A survey map followed, showing boundaries along Northridge Creek, the old Sisters Stones, a split cedar marker, and a line of timber rights running farther west than Ren expected. She leaned closer. Timber rights. Water access. A wagon road easement. This land was worth more than a lonely cabin. Much more. Elias, she said slowly. Why does Voss Verkepper nurte this place? He looked toward the window, where rain ran black over the glass. He says debt. That's not what. What's west of your timber line? Old mining trail. Nothing now. Railroad interest? He looked back at her. There it was. The thing no one had said yet. Surveyors came in spring, Elias said. Said they were only mapping grades. Railroads don't map grades for scenery. Ren turned to the next page. The tax receipt was current. The previous year too. The year before that was missing. Not unpaid. Perhaps. Only not in the bundle. Where are your older receipts? Silas kept some. In the cabin that burned? Elias nodded. And Voss knows that. Yes. She examined the deed again. Something bothered her. Not the signatures. Not the seal. The dates. Your father died before your brother. 6 years before. And your mother before him. This survivorship clause means Silas' share passed to you if he died without wife or child. He had neither. Was his death certified? Elias went very still. Ren looked up. The stove popped softly. Elias. His voice was quiet. They found bones. That wasn't my question. His hand closed around the compass in the tin box. Cabin burned hot. Middle of winter. No one could get near it till morning. Sheriff said it was Silas. Who? Dr. Mayhew. Sheriff Pike witnessed. Pike still dead. Doctor still. Yes. Ren looked down at the papers, then back at him. And Voss is questioning the title after all these years, because if Silas was not properly certified, or if a debt was attached to Silas' share, he can muddy your ownership long enough to force settlement. Elias stared at her. What? She asked. Most men take 3 weeks to understand that. Most men don't read what wants to hurt them. His hand relaxed slowly around the compass. Ren turned another page and found a copy of an old promissory note, marked paid. The lender's name was not Voss. It was Mercy Ridge Mercantile and Supply, from before Voss consolidated the town's debt. The paid stamp was faded but present. Below it ran Silas Cord S. Ren's eyes narrowed. Did your brother sign off? What do you mean? She slid the note toward him. This S starts high and leans left. Did he write that way? Elias bent over the paper. Yes. And you? He pulled a scrap from the tin. An old feed order signed Elias Cord. His name was Spare. Angular. The E cut sharply downward. Ren placed the two signatures side by side. Then she opened the leather folder he had dropped earlier. Not touching it, only glancing when Elias did not stop her. Inside was another document. A bank copy. Newer ink. Same promissory language. Larger amount. Not marked paid. Signed Silas Cord. But the S began low. And leaned right. Ren felt the room tighten. Where did you get that? She asked. Pinned to my door 2 months after Silas burned. By Voss. By his clerk. This signature is in your brother A. Elias closed his eyes for 1 second. Not surprise. Confirmation. You knew, Ren said. Mott suspect. Why didn't you challenge it? With what? Burned records? A dead sheriff. A doctor who owes Voss money. A town that laughs before it listens? Ren had no answer. Outside, the rain softened further, almost stopping. In the new quiet, they both heard it. A faint crunch. Not from the stove, not from the roof, from outside. Elias blew out the lamp so fast the room vanished. Ren sat perfectly still. Moonless darkness filled the cabin. The only light came from the dull red seam around the stove door. Elias moved without sound to the window. Ren rose, careful not to scrape the chair, and took the iron poker from beside the hearth. Another crunch. Then a whisper. Someone was on the porch. A thin strip of paper slid under the door. Elias waited. Footsteps retreated across the boards, then down into wet dirt. By the time Elias opened the door, the clearing was empty except for mist, dripping pines, and darkness. Ren picked up the paper. It was not a formal notice. It was a page torn from an account ledger. The ruled lines filled Vekepte hat names and numbers in tight black ink. Near the bottom, one entry had been circled so hard the pen had nearly cut through. Silas Cord, balance transferred to 8. Voss. Beside it was a date. 3 days after Silas was supposed to have died. Ren looked at Elias. His face in the stove glow had gone pale beneath the weathering. Then she turned the paper over. On the back, written in a hurried hand, were 6 words. Ask your bride what she knows. Elias read the 6 words twice without speaking. Ask your bride what she knows. The stove gave a soft iron tick as the fire settled. Beyond the door, the mountain held its breath in mist and black pine. Ren could still hear the retreating footfalls in her mind, though whoever had crossed the porch was gone now. swallowed by the wet dark before Elias could see a face. He stood with the torn ledger page in one hand and the rifle in the other. Ren stood across from him with the poker still gripped so tightly her burned palm began to throb. The words on the back of the page seemed larger than the paper itself. "Ask your bride what she knows." Elias lifted his eyes to her. He did not accuse her. That was the first thing Ren noticed, and because she noticed it, it hurt more than accusation might have. A suspicious man would have narrowed his eyes, stepped back, demanded names, dates, explanations. Elias Cord did none of that. He only looked at Mott Fahey with the weary stillness of a man who had just discovered another board missing from a bridge he was already crossing. "Do you?" he asked. Ren swallowed. "Know what? Anything about this?" The answer came too quickly, and both of them heard it. Not because it was false, because fear had pushed it out before thought could shape it. Elias folded the paper once along its torn edge. "All right." For now, Ren felt heat rise behind her ribs. That sounds like a kindness with a lock on it. It's what Mott can give tonight. She looked toward the window. In the faint stove glow, the glass showed only darkness and the blurred reflection of two strangers bound by paper. Rain and trouble neither had chosen cleanly. "Mott don't know who brought that page," she said. "Mott don't know why they wrote about me. Mott have never met Harlan Voss before today. Mott had never heard the name Silas Cord until you spoke it on the road." Elias watched her face. Not with softness, but with attention. Ren forced herself to continue. "But Mott know ledgers. Mott know how debt can be made to look holy if the handwriting is neat enough. Mott know how men who own desks can ruin people who own tools. And Mott know that whoever left that paper either wants to help us or wants you looking at me instead of them." The last words hung between them. Elias glanced at the door. "That second one sounds like Voss," he said. "Or someone afraid of Voss. Most people are." No. The answer was too flat to be pride. Ren studied him. That is the same as not being hurt by him. He looked back at her. For a moment, the room grew so quiet she could hear rainwater dripping from the eaves into the barrel outside. Then Elias lowered the rifle. "You should sleep," he said. Ren almost laughed. With a forged debt, armed men, a land claim, a dead brother S name written 3 days after his death, and a stranger sneaking notes under the door. Yes, that is a poor invitation to sleep. It's the only one Mott had. The corners of her mouth tightened despite herself. Elias set the rifle across the table and unfolded the page under the stove glow. He placed the older paid note beside it, then the newer bank copy with the false signature. Ren recognized the arrangement at once. Not a man ignoring trouble. A man laying out the pieces before he decided where to bleed. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go to the land office. Not without copying these." He looked at her. "If Voss sees what we have, he may try to take it," Ren said. "Or claim we altered it. Or produce some fresh paper with cleaner ink and louder witnesses. Mott don't have copying paper. You have flour sacks. For legal copies, for working copies." She crossed to the flour chest, untied one empty sack, and shook it flat. The cloth was coarse but pale enough. Then she took a charred sliver of wood from near the stove, tested the blackened end against the bottom edge, and made a clear mark. Elias watched. "You going to copy an account page with charcoal on flour cloth?" "No. Mort met going to map the entries, the names, the dates, and the hand spacing. Then tomorrow, if Voss tries to pocket that page, Mott can still tell a court what was on it. Court may not listen. Then we'll make it harder for them not to." He stood there another second, as if the idea of we had weight he did not know how to lift. Then he pulled the second chair out for her. Ren sat. For the next hour, the cabin became less a home than a war room made of rough boards, a stove heat, and stubborn silence. Elias trimmed a lamp wick low enough that it would not shine far through the window. Ren copied the ledger page onto flower cloth, not every flourish, but the bones of it, names, dates, amounts, transfer marks, the strange spacing before he and Voss, the heavy circle around Silas Cord S entry. She copied the 6 words from the back last, and when she did, Elias looked away. Ren noticed the handwriting then. Not the ledger hand. The warning hand. It was hurried, uneven, cramped by fear, but not uneducated. The writer had formed the capital A with a sharp roof and no crossbar. The same shape appeared nowhere on the ledger page. "Do you know this hand?" she asked. Elias leaned over. "No. Could be a Could be someone young trying to write fast. Could." Ren looked up. "You always answer like that when you don't want to hope." Yeah, there it was. Plain as a nail. She returned to the page. Near midnight, Elias barred the door with a thick oak plank and checked the window latch. Ren set the cot in the small room behind the hanging blanket. It was narrow but solid, with a rope frame that needed tightening. The blanket smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke. On the wall above it hung a single wooden peg, empty except for a strip of blue cloth tied around it. Ren stood looking at that cloth. Elias saw her from the doorway. "Silas?" she asked. "Yes. Mott can sleep in the loft." His answer came too fast. Then he corrected himself. "Mort mean, you don't need to. The room was his. It's not him." Ren looked at the cot, then at the man in the doorway who had lost a brother in fire and still kept a place ready. Not quite shrine and not quite storage. "Mott Luglunk be respectful," she said. "Mott no." He stepped back. Before he left, Ren said, "Elias." He paused. "If that note was meant to make you doubt me, it will work better if we let silence do the job." He looked at her for a long moment. "What should Mott... What you actually want..." His hand rested against the door frame. The lamplight made him look smaller and older than he had on the platform, but also harder to move. "Why did you come?" he asked. Ren had expected the question. Still, it entered her like cold. "Because of your... That sentence?" "Yes. 2 people making each other stronger." "Yes. Mort wrote that on a bad night. Truth often comes out then." He looked down. "And what were you running from?" There it was. The fair question. Ren could have given him the clean answer. Poverty. Loneliness. No family worth naming. A boarding house that charged too much and fed too little. A world that found uses for strong women but few places for them. But the note lay on the table in the next room, and something about the words "Ask your bride what she knows" made the clean answer feel like another kind of lie. "A man named Orrin Pike," she said. Elias' head lifted. "Mort don't know if he was kin to your sheriff. He ran a freight office in St. Joseph. He handled agency contracts, transport papers, wage drafts, sometimes debt transfers for women travelling west." Elias grew very still. What did he do? Ren looked at her bandaged hand. He changed numbers. The cabin seemed to tighten around them. "In wage books?" Elias asked. "In everything. Passage fees, boarding debts, agency commissions, marriage contracts." He would tell a woman she owed $20, then $30, then $40. If she couldn't pay, he would sell her contract to whoever would take the debt. Elias' voice lowered. "Sell her. Not legally. Not in the words men admit to. But paper can make a cage without calling itself iron." His jaw hardened. Ren continued before pity could enter his face. She did not want pity. Pity was too often a polite form of ownership. Mort caught him once. Not allowed. Mort only saw the entries. A widow named Marcy Bell had paid her passage twice. He marked neither payment. When I questioned it, He laughed and said Mott had big hands for a woman and a small understanding of business. What happened? Mott copied the page before he burned it. Elias did not move. Ren reached into her carpet bag and withdrew the small oilcloth packet she had not unpacked. From inside came a folded sheet, worn soft at the creases. Mott kept this. She handed it to him. Elias stepped into the room and took it. His eyes moved over the copied figures. You copied all this from memory? Not memory. Mott had 10 minutes. Bad light, and a laundry receipt to write on. This name, he tapped the bottom of the page. Oh. Pike. Yes, Sheriff Pike's first name was Orrin. 2RS. Ren felt the air leave her. Yes. Could he have had a son? Nephew? Had a younger brother. Left Mercy Ridge years ago after trouble with freight contracts. The floor seemed to shift under Ren's feet. She sat slowly on the cot. Elias stared at the paper in his hand, then toward the main room where the ledger page waited. Orrin Pike, he said. Harlan Voss. Silas S. Det. Ren pressed her fingers against her forehead. Mott did not know. Mort believed. She looked up sharply. He said it with no flourish. No warmth added for comfort. Just a decision made and placed plainly between them. Mott believe you, he repeated. Ren had been believed before by desperate women, by children, by people with no power to help. She had rarely been believed by a man whose own safety would be easier if he doubted her. It struck deep, deeper than she wanted. Don't make that a gift too quickly, she said. It is too quick. Mott watched you with Voss. Liars who serve men like him don't insult him before they know where the exits are. Despite everything, she almost smiled. That your legal reasoning, my mountain reason, it may hold back. Elias handed the Pike copy back to her. Tomorrow, bring that too. His brows drew together. If Voss knows Mott carry it, he will know exactly why the note mentioned me. He may also know Orrin Pike is connected to whatever he did here. We need one card he has not seen. Elias thought it over, then nodded. He turned to go, but Ren stopped him again. Why did you ask for a bride? Elias? The question surprised him more than all the talk of forgery. He looked toward the dark main room. Cabin needed another pair of hands. That was not the whole answer. She waited. His voice came quieter. After Silas died, people came for a while. Mrs. Vale. A few men from the ridge. Preacher. Then winter passed. Folks stopped coming. Mott told myself Mott preferred it. Less talk. Less pity. Less advice. And for a time, he rubbed his thumb across the scarred knuckle of his opposite hand. Then one morning last spring, Mott cut my leg with an axe. Not bad enough to die if handled right. Bad enough to die if Mort couldn't get the bleeding stopped. Mort sat on that floor over there with my belt around my thigh, looking at the door, and Mott realized there was no one expected to open it. Ren said nothing. That's a hard thing to know about your own life, he said. The words were simple. They broke something open all the same. Ren thought of boarding house rooms where no one would have noticed if her bed stayed empty except to rent it again. She thought of train platforms full of people eager to laugh but not one willing to ask if she was afraid. She thought of a sentence in a letter written on a bad night by a man who had seen the shape of loneliness and named it without decoration. Mott understand, she said. Elias looked at her, and she knew he believed that too. Neither of them said anything after that. Sleep came in pieces. Ren lay on Silas Cord's old cot vacapte had her boots close by and the poker within reach. The cabin made night sounds around her. Log settling, wind pressing under the eaves, a faint drip where the roof needed patching. In the main room, Elias moved once, then again, then went still. Near dawn, Ren woke to the smell of coffee and cold air. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then the mountain returned, the depot, the bull, the notice, the ledger page. She rose, washed at the base main, changed into her least muddy skirt, and pinned hair firmly at the back of her neck. Her burned palm stung when she flexed it, but the Vekepra Apay held. In the main room, Elias stood at the stove frying cornmeal cakes in a cast-iron pan. He had already packed the documents into the tin box, then into a leather satchel which he wore crosswise under his coat. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some." He set a plate down for her. Good enough. They ate standing because the table was covered with copied notes, folded cloth, and the charcoal map Ren had made of the ledger entry. Outside, morning came grey and sharp. The rain had stopped, leaving the clearing silver with wet grass. Beyond the barn, Ren could see the broken fence lines more clearly now. There were repairs everywhere waiting for hands. Roof, bridge, pen, chimney, winter stack. A life could be measured by what needed mending. As they loaded the wagon for town, Mrs. Vale appeared from the east trail carrying a covered basket and a walking stick. She was a small woman with iron-grey hair braided tight around her head, eyes like flint, and a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She stopped at the sight of Ren and looked her up and down without apology. Ren braced herself. "Mrs." Vale said, "Good." He needed someone the wind could carry off. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Ren did not know whether to laugh or thank her. "Mrs." Vale marched to the porch and handed Elias the basket. "Biscuits. 2 boiled eggs. Don't let Voss keep you past dinner unless you mean to bite him." "Morning, Mrs." Vale, Elias said. "Don't morning me. Mort saw lanterns on the ridge last night." Elias' expression changed. "You saw who?" "No. Mott saw lights. Heard a shot. Then this morning, Barlow's bull was standing in my cabbage patch looking wronged by history." Ren coughed into her hand. "Mrs." Vale turned to her. "You the one cut him loose?" "Yes." "Ma'am." "Good knife." "Messy. Messy works if the beast lives." She stepped closer and took Ren's bandaged hand before Ren could decide whether to offer it. The old woman examined the wrap. "Rope burn." "You clean it?" "Yes." "With what?" "Boiled water, pine salve, and clean cloth." "Mrs." Vale grunted approval. "You'll do," Elias muttered, glad that S settled. "Mrs." Vale ignored him. Her gaze shifted toward the wagon, then back to Ren. "Town will test you today." "Mott expect so." "No. You don tea." Mercy Ridge smiles before it cut. Don to bleed where they can see if you can help it. Ren understood the advice. She also understood the kindness buried under it. "Thank you," she said. "Mrs." Vale leaned in slightly. "Don't let that banker put you in a chair too small. Makes a person look foolish when it breaks. And he lunk have arranged it if he can." Ren stared at her. "Mrs." Vale's mouth tightened. "Mott know his habits." Elias looked sharply at the old woman, but she was already stepping away. "Mrs." "Vale," he said. "Do you know who left a paper under my door?" She stopped. "Not for long, but enough." "What Elias did not answer. "Mrs." Vale looked from him to Ren and back again. Her face gave nothing away except that it was giving nothing away. "Best get to town before Voss writes the morning without you in it," she said. Then she walked back down the east trail. Basket gone, stick tapping once every 3rd step. Ren watched her until the trees hid her. "She knows something," Ren said. Yeah. Will she tell? Only when she decides I deserve it. She sounds wise. She impossible. Those often travel together. They took the road down with the mule pulling carefully over washed stone. The bull was gone from the meadow, leaving torn grass and deep hoofmarks. At the claim notice, Elias stopped the wagon. The paper was still nailed over his road marker. Ren climbed down and examined it in daylight. The seal was wrong. She saw it clearly now. Not merely blurred. Wrong. The county seal should have had a 5-point star above the wheat sheaf. This one had the sheaf, but no star. Either the printer had made an error, or the document had not come from the county at all. Elias, she said. He came beside her. Look at the... His eyes narrowed. Is the land office also the bank? She asked. Same building. Voss holds county filings twice a week until the circuit clerk rides through. That is a fine arrangement for a dishonest man. Yes. Do you have a county paper with the proper seal? In the deed bundle. We compare before we show him anything. He nodded. This time, when she touched the notice, he did not stop her. Ren did not tear it down. She lifted the lower corner and looked at the back. There, faint but visible where rain had not fully reached, was the watermark of the paper supplier. M.R. Mercantile. Not county stock. She let the corner fall. That notice is meant to scare. Not stand, she said. Will that... To a judge? Yes. To a town? Perhaps not. Voss owns more of the town than the judge does. Then we must make the town afraid to be seen believing him. Elias looked up at her. There was respect in his face now, plain enough that she had to look away. Mercy Ridge came into view under a hard pale sky. Morning had sharpened every roofline and window. Smoke lifted from chimneys. Wagons stood before the mercantile. A few riders tied horses near the saloon, though it was early for whiskey unless a man had either no work or too much memory. By the time Elias drove onto Main Street, people had already heard a version of the night before. Ren could tell by the way they stared. Not with simple amusement now, with curiosity sharpened by unease. A boy pointed at her bandaged hand. The yellow-curled woman from the day before stood outside the dressmaker's shop and whispered to another woman, who looked Ren up and down, then quickly away when Ren met her eyes. Outside the Bank and Land Office, Harlan Voss waited in a grey suit, gold watch chain bright against his vest. Beside him stood Deputy Pritch, Dr. Mayhew, and a thin clerk with ink-stained fingers. 2 chairs had been placed on the boardwalk, one ordinary, one noticeably narrow, with a cracked cane seat. Ren saw it. Elias saw it a second later. His face darkened. Ren touched his sleeve lightly before he could speak. No. He looked at her. She stepped past the narrow chair and remained standing. Voss smiled. Mrs. Cord. Mott took the liberty of providing a seat. Mott prefer to stand. Mott insist. You had an eventful night. Mott said Mott prefer to stand. The boardwalk quieted. Voss's smile thinned, but he recovered quickly. As you wish. Mr. Cord. Shall we settle this matter inside? Elias stepped forward. We'll settle it where witnesses can hear. That made the clerk look up sharply. Voss gave a soft laugh. Legal affairs are not theatre. No, Ren said. But fraud dislikes daylight for a reason. The whisper that moved through the gathered people was small, but it moved. Voss turned to her. You have been in Mercy Ridge less than 1 day. Madam, Mort would advise humility. Ren looked at the bank window, where the painted letters read Harlan Voss. Banking, land, and secured notes. Then she looked back at him. Mott have been advised many things by men who lost money when Mott could count, she said. Deputy Pritch lowered his eyes. Dr. Mayhew stared at Ren with a strange, troubled expression, as if trying to place a face from a dream. Voss gestured toward the door. Inside. Elias did not move. Show the petition. In due course. The banker's gaze hardened for half a breath. Then he nodded to the clerk. The clerk opened a folder and produced a paper. Elias reached for it, but Voss held up one finger. You may inspect. You may not remove. Ren stepped closer. Voss hesitated, then let the paper remain where both could see. The petition claimed unresolved debt against Silas Cord's estate, irregular survivorship transfer, missing tax receipt, and questionable boundary description along the western timber line. It requested temporary authority to restrict removal of assets until review. It looked impressive. Most traps did. Ren read the first paragraph twice. Then the signature line. Then the seal. This one had the star. Real county paper. But the language referenced an attached note. Where is the attached note? She asked. Voss' brows lifted. Pardon. The petition cites promissory note B as basis for debt transfer. Where is note B? That is bank property. It is the foundation of your petition. It will be produced before the proper authority. Then your public notice last night had no standing. Voss smiled politely. Mrs. Cord. No legal language can be exciting to those newly acquainted with it. Beute. The notice used a false seal. The boardwalk went still. Elias turned his head toward her. Voss did not. That was how Ren knew she had struck near bone. She continued, voice steady. It was printed on mercantile stock, nailed over a private road marker before court review, and used by armed men to block lawful access to Cord's own cabin. If it came from you, it is intimidation. If it did not, you should be eager to know who forged your authority. The silence widened until even the horses seemed to stop shifting. Deputy Pritch looked at Voss. Mr. Voss? Voss' smile disappeared so slowly it felt practiced. An administrative notice, he said. Nothing more. With a false seal, Ren said. A temporary mark with armed men to prevent conflict. Dr. Mayhew cleared his throat. There was a gunshot on the ridge. Harlan. Voss' gaze snapped toward him. The doctor paled, then looked away. Elias said, Your men fired. My associates reported a loose bull and a dangerous disturbance involving your new wife. Ren almost admired the speed of it. Almost. There it is, she said softly. Voss looked at her. There is what? The story you planned before you knew who cut the... Something shifted in the crowd. Not belief. Not yet. But attention. That was enough for a beginning. Voss stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Elias and Ren could hear. You think intelligence makes you safe. It does not. It only makes you worth removing sooner. Elias moved. Ren touched his sleeve again. This time, the restraint cost him. She felt it through the cloth, the hard tremor of a man choosing not to give his enemy the anger he wanted. Voss straightened and spoke loudly. Noon remains the deadline. Produce clear proof of debt satisfaction and proper title, or Mort will request temporary seizure authority pending circuit review. Elias said, We have the deed. Excellent. Bring it inside. Voss blinked. Elias' voice stayed level. We'll take copies to the circuit clerk ourselves. The clerk is not due for 2 days. Then we'll meet him on the road. A flicker of irritation crossed Voss' face. Ren saw it. So did Elias. The circuit clerk mattered. Voss did not want the papers leaving Mercy Ridge. The thin bank clerk shifted from one foot to the other, clutching his folder to his chest. His eyes darted once toward Ren, then away. He was young, perhaps 20, with a sharp Adam's apple and ink smudged near his cuff. His fear was not the fear of a man caught lying for profit. It was the fear of someone trapped under orders. Ren glanced at his hands. On the side of his right middle finger was a dark groove worn by a pen. His nails were bitten short. A tiny smear of blue ink stained his thumb. Blue ink. The warning on the ledger page had been black, but the folded account line had looked like bank ink. She filed that away. Voss stepped back. Deputy. Note, Mr. Cord's refusal to cooperate. Deputy Pritch shifted uneasily. He did come. Harlan. He refused inspection. Inspection by who? The question came from the street. Everyone turned. Mrs. Vale stood beside the water trough. Shawl wrapped tight, walking stick planted in the mud like a fence post. Voss's face changed again. Not much, but enough. Mrs. Vale. This is a legal matter. So was my husband Esmil note when you doubled it after his stroke. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Voss's voice cooled. That was settled years ago. Most robberies are, if the thief keeps the receipt. Ren looked at Elias. Elias looked stunned. Mrs. Vale's eyes moved to Ren briefly, and in them Ren saw warning. Not now. Not all. Voss inhaled through his nose. This town has long tolerated your bitterness out of respect for your age. My age is the only thing in this town older than your lies. A few men near the saloon gave low laughs, then stopped when Voss looked their way. The banker turned sharply to Elias. Noon. Inside. With the deed. Or the petition proceeds without your cooperation. He went into the bank, the clerk hurrying behind him. Dr. Mayhew lingered a moment, looking at Elias as if words pressed behind his teeth. Then Voss called his name from inside, and the doctor followed. Deputy Pritch remained on the boardwalk. He looked at the narrow chair, then at Ren. What did they know about that? He said quietly. Ren believed him. That did not absolve him. No, she said. You only stood beside it. His face reddened. Elias said, Lyle. The deputy looked at him. Who signed the emergency petition? Judge Bell's seal came by rider yesterday. Harlan drafted the language. Judge Bell is in Astor Creek. Yes. Who carried the petition? Pritch hesitated, then said, Mott did. Elias' expression hardened. You rode to Astor Creek and back in one day? No. Harlan had a signed blank for urgent filings. Judge leaves them sometimes. Ren felt a cold, clean line of understanding run through her. A signed blank, she said. Deputy Pritch seemed to realize too late what he had admitted. He looked toward the bank door, then back at Elias. Mort shouldn't have said that. No, Ren said. You should have said it louder. Pritch stepped down from the boardwalk and walked away, shoulders tight. Mrs. Vale came to them, her stick tapping against the planks. You handled that poorly, she told Elias. Thank you, he said. You handled it better, she told Ren. Don't enjoy it. He looked come harder now. Ren looked at the bank window. Voss stood behind the glass, half hidden by the painted letters, watching them. Mrs. Vale lowered her voice. Do you have Silas deed papers? Yes, Elias said. Do you have every... Elias paused. What does that mean? The old woman's mouth pressed thin. Silas came to me 2 nights before the fire, she said. He was carrying a blue ledger. Elias went still. Ren remembered the blue cloth above the cot. "What blue ledger?" Elias asked. "Mrs." Vale's eyes did not leave his. The one he said would ruin Harlan Voss if he lived long enough to put it in the right hands. The boardwalk, the town, the morning, all of it seemed to draw back. Elias's voice changed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Silas made me swear not to unless the bank moved on your land. It moved 2 months after he died." "No, Mrs." Vale said. "That was bait. This is the move." Ren felt her burned palm pulse under the bandage. Elias leaned closer. "Where is the ledger?" "Mrs." Vale looked toward the north ridge, toward the mountain road, toward the cabin that had been searched by memory and grief, but perhaps not by need. Silas said if he didn't come back, the safest place for truth was where fire had already made men stop looking. Elias's face went grey. "The burned cabin," Ren whispered. "Mrs." Vale nodded once. And from inside the bank, something heavy slammed against the window as Harlan Voss realized exactly what they had just been told. The slam against the bank window lasted only an instant. A sharp sound. Wood. Glass. Something struck from inside. Then silence. Every head on Main Street turned toward the building. Harlan Voss stepped back from the window before anyone could clearly see him. The painted letters on the glass hid most of his face, but not fast enough. Ren saw anger. Not irritation. Not embarrassment. Fear. Only for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. The banker disappeared into the shadows of his office. "Mrs." Vale watched the window and muttered. "Well, that answered one question." Elias looked at her. "You just told him something he didn't want us to know," she said. "No," Ren replied quietly. "We told him something he hoped we would never learn." The old woman nodded. "Those were not the same thing." "Not at all." A wagon rattled past the far end of the street. Somewhere a blacksmith's hammer struck iron. The ordinary sounds of town life returned one by one, but Main Street no longer felt ordinary. People had heard enough to sense a crack in the story, and once a crack appeared, truth had a place to start pushing. Elias turned to Mrs. Vale. "Tell me everything." The old woman glanced around. "Not then where?" She pointed toward the feed store across the street. "Back room. Old Nolan owes me 3 favors and 2 apologies." Without waiting for agreement, she crossed the muddy street. Ren and Elias followed. Several townspeople pretended not to watch. None succeeded. Inside Nolan's feed and supply, the smell of grain, leather, horse liniment, and sawdust pushed away the scent of rain. Mr. Nolan himself was a broad-shouldered man with white whiskers and permanently suspicious eyebrows. When Mrs. Vale entered, he sighed. "What private?" Mott disliked that word. "Then think of it as civic responsibility." Mott disliked that one too. "Mrs. Vale walked past him anyway. Nolan looked at Elias. "Bank trouble?" "Yes." Nolan grunted. "That man causes more business than drought." He jerked his head toward the back room. The storage room held feed ledgers, seed catalogues, spare harness parts, and a battered table. A single small window faced an alley. Mrs. Vale closed the door. For several seconds she simply stood there, gathering her thoughts. Ren waited. So did Elias. Finally the old woman spoke. 3 weeks before Silas died, he came to my house after midnight. Elias sat down slowly. "Mrs." Vale continued. "He looked exhausted. Hadn't he shaved in days? Kept checking the windows every few minutes." "Why?" Elias asked. He said someone was following him. He didn't. Voss? Not direct. The old woman leaned on her walking stick. Silas had been hauling freight contracts that winter. Records. Loan papers. Tax filings. Small things nobody notices until enough small things point toward one large thing. Ren felt her attention sharpen. Numbers. Records. Paper trails. Those were her territory. What did he find? She asked. Mrs. Vale looked at her. At first he thought it was bookkeeping errors. Most fraud begins that way. The old woman nodded. Yes. He said some debts disappeared after payment. Others appeared after settlement. Land changed hands through signatures that looked real until you compared them to older documents. Elias stared at the floor. Why didn't he tell me? He planned. The answer came softly. Then he found something worse. The room seemed smaller. Ren folded her hands together. What? Mrs. Vale took a breath. Silas believed Harlan Voss wasn't simply stealing land. Nobody spoke. Outside, a wagon rolled past. A dog barked once. The sound felt impossibly distant. What else? Ren asked. Mrs. Vale's eyes moved to the window. He believed Voss was buying judges. The words landed heavily. Elias sat back. Ren did not move. Corrupt bankers existed. Corrupt land agents existed. Corrupt sheriffs existed. But buying judges changed the scale entirely. That turned fraud into infrastructure. It meant every legal path could already be poisoned. He had proof, Ren asked. That what he claimed. The blue leg. Yes. Mrs. Vale tightened her grip on the walking stick. He said every transaction was copied there. Names. Dates. Transfers. False notes. Real notes. Payments hidden. Property seized. Why not take it to the county? He planned. The old woman looked directly at Elias. Then his cabin burned. The words settled like snow. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally Elias said quietly, You think he was murdered? Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. Mott think your brother discovered something worth killing for. The room went silent. Not dramatic silence. Not theatrical silence. The silence that follows a truth everyone already suspected. Ren looked at Elias. His face had gone hard. Not angry. Hard. Like frozen ground. Like a mountain ridge in winter. Where was the cabin? She asked. 2 miles west of ours, Elias answered. Has anyone searched? Mott did. How carefully? After the... Yes. Every board. Every beam. Mrs. Vale shook her head. No. Elias looked up sharply. The old woman pointed at him. You searched like a grieving brother. Then she pointed at Ren. You need someone who searches like an accountant. Ren blinked. Mrs. Vale continued. A grieving brother looks for keepsake. She tapped her stick against the floor. An accountant looks for things someone wanted hidden. For the first time that morning, Elias almost smiled. A grim smile. But real. Ren understood immediately. Fire destroyed much. But people often misunderstood what survived. Metal survived. Stone survived. Hidden compartments survived. Most importantly, assumptions survived. If everyone believed the ledger had burned, nobody would keep looking. Tell me about the cabin, Ren said. Elias leaned forward. It sat near an old mining cut. Stone foundation. Yes. Root. Yes. Spring nearby. 50 yards. Field. Any floor storage. Not that Mott no. Mrs. Vale gave a small snort. Which means yes. Elias frowned. Silas built things like a squirrel hides nut. The old woman looked at Ren. Once took me 3 months to discover he'd hidden my missing pie pan inside a wall. What? He thought it was. Ren smiled despite herself. For the first time, the dead man felt real. Not merely a mystery. A person that mattered. People solved puzzles. People mourned people. Those were different things. A knock sounded at the door. Everyone froze. Nolan opened it without waiting. Pritch stood in the doorway. He looked nervous. More nervous than before. "Sorry," he said. "No, you're not," Nolan replied. The deputy looked at Elias. "Need Mrs." Vale narrowed her eyes. "With witnesses," she said. Pritch nodded. "Fine." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His voice dropped. "Harlan just sent riders." Elias stood. "North." Ren felt her stomach tighten. "The burned cat." Pritch nodded. "Yes." The room went still. "Mrs." Vale muttered something that sounded unfit for church. Elias's expression darkened. 10 minutes ago. 3 men. Armed? Yes. Authority. Pritch laughed bitterly. "Since when has that stopped him?" Ren looked at the deputy carefully. "Why are you telling us?" The question hit harder than Elias. Pritch swallowed, then looked away. "My father lost his farm to one of Voss' notes." Nobody spoke. The deputy continued. "We paid it twice." His voice sounded old suddenly. Older than the man himself. Mort was 14. Ren understood. There it was. The wound. Everyone in Mercy Ridge carried one. The trick was figuring out which wounds belonged to Voss. Pritch looked at Elias. "Mort, can't he help open?" "You know." "Yes." They all did. Because power survived through fear. Because families needed jobs. Because debts chained people more effectively than iron. Because courage cost something. Sometimes everything. "Thank you," Elias said. The deputy nodded once. Then left. The door closed behind him. "Mrs." Vale immediately pointed her stick toward the window. "Move." Nobody argued. Within 3 minutes they were back outside. The wagon turned west. Not toward the bank. Not toward the land office. Toward the burned cabin. The mountain road climbed through wet pines and scattered stone. Clouds hung low enough to brush the ridges. Ren sat beside Elias while the mule worked steadily uphill. Neither spoke much. There was no need. Time had compressed. Every mile now mattered. If Voss men reached the ruins first, anything they found could disappear forever, or be destroyed, or replaced. That possibility bothered Ren most. Fraud rarely erased evidence. Fraud preferred counterfeit evidence. A false ledger could be more dangerous than a missing one. By noon the road narrowed. The trees thickened. The air grew colder. Finally Elias pointed ahead. There, Ren saw it. The remains of Silas Cord's cabin stood in a clearing beneath a ridge of black rock, or what remained of it. The stone chimney still rose from the earth. Part of one wall remained waist-high. Everything else had collapsed inward years ago. Grass and young pine shoots had begun reclaiming the site. From a distance it looked abandoned. Forgotten. Dead. Then Ren spotted movement. 3 horses. 2 wagons. Men. Already there. Voss had arrived first. And one of the men was digging. Ren saw the digging before she saw the men. A fresh trench cut through the blackened remains of the cabin floor. Wet soil lay piled beside it. 2 shovels leaned against a stone foundation block. Someone had already overturned half the burned site in a hurry. Not searching. Destroying. The difference mattered. "Stop the wagon," Ren said. Elias had already pulled the reins. The mule halted beneath the pines. Neither of them climbed down immediately. 3 men stood among the ruins. One was Abel, the lantern carrier from the night before. Another was Rusk, the man who had nearly shot the bull. The third was younger, broad-shouldered, unfamiliar, and wearing a bank employee-esque coat beneath his slicker. No Harlan Voss. That told Ren something. The banker wanted distance from whatever happened here. "See anything?" Elias asked quietly. Ren narrowed her eyes. The younger man held a folded map. Not a survey map. A search map. Sections had been marked with charcoal XS. They know where they re-look. Elias' jaw tightened. Someone Yes, the realization hung between them. If Voss had sent men directly to the ruins after hearing Mrs. Vale mention the ledger, then either he had already suspected the cabin, or someone close to Silas had talked years ago. Neither possibility felt good. Abel spotted them first. His face darkened. The greeting carried no warmth. Elias climbed down from the wagon. Ren followed. The younger man folded the map immediately and shoved it inside his coat. Too quickly. Another detail worth remembering. "What are you doing here?" Elias asked. Rusk stabbed his shovel into the dirt. "Official review of burned ground. Property assessment. That cabin is T-Bank property. Depends who owns the debt." There it was again. Debt. Always debt. Always the word men used when they wanted something belonging to somebody else. Ren stepped forward. "What exactly are you assessing?" The younger man answered this time. "Potential assets." His voice was educated. "Careful. Not a labourer. Not hired muscle. A clerk. Or bookkeeper. Interesting." Ren looked at the trench. "How much value have you found in 6-year-old ashes?" The young man's eyes flickered. Tiny movement. Easy to miss. Ren didn't miss it. "Enough to keep digging," he replied. Lie. Not a perfect one, but a lie. Because men searching honestly usually wanted others to believe they'd found nothing. These men wanted everyone to believe they were finding something. That meant performance. Not discovery. Elias stepped toward the ruins. Abel blocked him. The movement was immediate. Aggressive. Planned. Restricted air. Elias looked at the man. Not angry. Not loud. Just looking. "That's my brother, Scab." "What?" "Still sits on my land. Under review. By about." The mountain wind moved through the pines. Nobody spoke. Then Ren noticed something. Near the chimney. A pile of stone. Not random. Stacked. Recently. She looked again. The stones were clean. Cleaner than the surrounding ruins. Someone had moved them. Recently. Very recently. Elias. His eyes shifted toward her. She nodded subtly toward the chimney. He saw it. Good. The younger man saw them seeing it. Better. His hand moved instinctively toward his coat pocket. The map. Noted. Ren smiled. A tiny smile. The kind that unsettled dishonest people. The young man noticed. His confidence weakened slightly. Good. She walked forward. Not toward the trench. Toward the chimney. Abel stepped into her path. Big mistake. Very big. Because the movement happened in full view of everyone. "Move," Ren said. "Bank authority." Abel blinked. "What?" "Show your authority. Mott don't have. You do if you re-standing on someone else's property." The man glanced toward the younger clerk. The hesitation lasted only a second. Long enough. The younger clerk answered instead. We have verbal authorization. Ren nodded. From who? Harlan. That S not authority. The young man flushed. Elias watched silently. The trap was building. Ren could feel it. She pointed toward the trench. You re-digging without county representatives? Nobody answered. You researching private property? Silence. You re-blocking the landowner? Silence. Interesting. The clerk crossed his arms. What exactly are you suggesting? Ren looked directly at him. That whatever you re-looking for, you re-afraid someone else will find first. The young man's face changed. Just for a second. Enough. Elias saw it too. The mountain man stepped around Abel. This time Abel grabbed his arm. Everything stopped. Even the wind. Rusk straightened. The young clerk inhaled sharply. Abel immediately realized his mistake. Because now there were witnesses. Not just Ren. Not just Elias. 2 ranch hands were riding along the upper trail. And both had stopped. Watching. Public mistakes mattered. Abel released Elias immediately. Too late. Don't touch me again, Elias said. His voice remained quiet, which somehow sounded more dangerous than shouting. The ranch hands kept watching. Good. Witnesses. Ren liked witnesses. People lied. Witnesses complicated lies. The younger clerk cleared his throat. Perhaps everyone should calm down. Excellent idea, Ren said. Then she walked directly past him. Toward the chimney. Nobody stopped her. Not because they wanted her there. Because they suddenly weren't sure they legally could. That distinction mattered. The ruined chimney rose nearly 7 feet high. Fieldstone. Mortared carefully. Still standing despite the fire. Ren crouched. Examined the base. Examined the surrounding soil. Examined the stone pile nearby. Then smiled again. Different smile. This one genuine. What? Elias asked. She pointed. He crouched beside her. The stones in the pile had soot marks. The stones still attached to the chimney had soot marks. Except for 3. 3 stones near the lower rear section. Those stones were cleaner. Newly exposed. Recently moved. Someone had removed them. Then replaced them badly. The mortar lines didn't match. Elias stared. They already searched. Yes. How can you tell? They were in a... Ren touched one stone. Still slightly loose. The men behind them had gone very quiet. Interesting. Very interesting. The younger clerk stepped forward. That Essen. No, Ren said. It isn't T. She pressed harder. The stone shifted. Abel took a step forward. Elias stood immediately. The movement stopped him. Not through threat. Through certainty. The little mountain man looked ready to break bones if necessary. Ren noticed something then. The clerk wasn't watching Elias. He was watching the chimney. Not the confrontation. The chimney. Fear. There it was. Pure and simple. Fear of discovery. Ren smiled. Now she knew. The ledger had existed. Maybe still existed. Otherwise nobody would care this much. She pushed again. The stone came loose. A hollow space appeared behind it. Everybody froze. The clerk's face lost colour. Elias slowly looked back at him. Interesting. Very interesting. Ren reached inside. Nothing. Empty. For 1 second disappointment hit. Then she noticed scratches. Deep scratches. Fresh. Something had been removed recently. Not years ago. Recently. Very recently. Someone got here first, Elias said. Not long ago. Ren touched the wood lining inside the cavity. Dry. Protected from weather. Perfect hiding place. The clerk started backing away. Just slightly. Wrong move. Ren saw it. So did Elias. The mountain man's eyes narrowed. Who found it? He asked. Nobody answered. Who found it? He repeated. The clerk swallowed. Abel looked away. Rusk suddenly became fascinated by the trees. Guilty men rarely coordinated well. Then hoofbeats echoed through the clearing. Fast. Everyone turned. A rider burst through the pines. Deputy Pritch. Hard. Breathing heavily. His horse lathered. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The deputy nearly fell from the saddle. Elias. The urgency in his voice silenced the clearing. Elias stepped forward. What? Pritch looked around. Saw the trench. Saw the chimney cavity. Saw the faces. Understood immediately. Then he said the one thing nobody expected. They found a... Everything stopped. The words hung in the mountain air. Cold. Heavy. Impossible. Ren stared at him. What? Pritch swallowed. His face looked pale. Shaken. Not acting. Genuinely shaken. The deputy pointed north. Toward the creek. Storm washed part of the bank out this morning. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Pritch's voice lowered. There's a skeleton buried near Northridge Creek. The clearing fell silent. Then came the next sentence. The one that changed everything. And Dr. Mayhew says it can be 6 years old. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The mountain seemed to absorb the words before returning them. A body. Not 6 years old. Ren looked from Deputy Pritch to Elias. The colour had drained from the mountain man's face. Not because he was afraid. Because he was calculating. Every possibility. Every implication. Every lie that suddenly became unstable. Where? Elias asked. His voice sounded distant. Northridge Creek, Pritch replied. Exactly where? About a quarter-mile east of the old crossing. Ren felt something tighten inside her. The old crossing. That mattered. Very much. Because according to the survey map in the deed bundle, the old crossing sat directly between Silas' cabin and the western timber boundary. The same area connected to the disputed land claim. The same area Voss suddenly wanted. The same area Silas had been investigating before the fire. Too many lines were meeting in one place. That was never accidental. Who found it? Ren asked. 2 boys. Anyone else? Pritch looked uncomfortable. Most of town by now. Of course. Mercy Ridge moved information the way dry grass carried spark. Fast. Dangerously. And impossible to stop. The deputy wiped rainwater from his forehead. Dr. Mayhew's there. At the mention of the doctor, the young bank clerk visibly tensed. Ren noticed. Again, the boy was terrible at hiding fear. Interesting. Very interesting. Did Mayhew identify it? Elias asked. Yes. Hard to... Pritch hesitated. Then added quietly. But the clothing was buried long. The clearing grew silent again. Because everybody understood. If the skeleton was 6 years old, then it could be Silas. Not unless something impossible had happened. Abel shifted uneasily. Rusk looked away. The young clerk seemed ready to be anywhere else on earth. Ren studied him. His fear had changed. Before, he'd feared discovery. Now he feared confirmation. Different thing. Important difference. The deputy looked toward the chimney. What happened here? Nobody found what they wanted, Ren said. The young clerk immediately turned toward her. Too fast. There it was again. Confirmation. Ren filed it away. Elias stepped closer to Pritch. You came... Yes. Before telling Voss, a shadow crossed the deputy's face. No, that answer told its own story. Voss already knew, which meant one of two things. Either someone informed him quickly, or he'd already been watching the area. Neither possibility was comforting. The mountain wind moved through the ruins. Ren looked at the chimney cavity again. Empty. But recently emptied. Very recently. Something had been hidden there. Something worth digging for. Something worth frightening people over. Something worth sending armed men to recover. And now a body had appeared. No. Not appeared. Been revealed. Different thing. Bodies didn't appear. Weather simply stopped hiding them. Ren said quietly. He looked at her. We need to see that. The answer came immediately. Yes. The young clerk stepped forward. You can... Everyone looked at him. He realized his mistake instantly. Too late. Canned, Ren asked. The clerk swallowed. What mean? Authorities should handle it. Authorities are handling it. She nodded toward Deputy Pritch. The deputy awkwardly raised one hand. Technically, the clerk's face reddened. Ren almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered the trench. The chimney. The search map hidden inside his coat. Sympathy evaporated. Elias climbed back onto the wagon. Come on. Nobody stopped them. Not this time. The ride to Northridge Creek took 20 minutes. Long enough for tension to grow. Short enough that nobody relaxed. The road followed the ridge before dropping toward a narrow valley cut by fast-moving water. Pines crowded both sides. Moss-covered stones lined the creek bank. Fallen leaves collected in wet drifts beneath cedar roots. Half the town seemed gathered there already. Wagons. Horses. Curious spectators. A few ranchers. Several merchants. Dr. Mayhew. And Harlan Voss. Of course. The banker stood near the creek bank beneath a black umbrella. Perfectly composed. Perfectly dry. Perfectly interested. Ren disliked him more every minute. The crowd parted slightly as Elias and Ren approached. Whispers followed. Not the same whispers as yesterday. Those had been mockery. These were uncertainty. A different animal entirely. Dr. Mayhew stood near an exposed section of creek bank where recent runoff had torn away several feet of soil. The skeleton lay partially visible beneath tangled roots. A boot remained attached to one leg. Fragments of clothing clung to the bones. The sight silenced most conversation. Death had a way of doing that. Even old death. Even mysterious death. Ren moved closer. The doctor looked up. For a second something strange crossed his face. Recognition. Not of Ren. Of purpose. Like seeing another person ask questions he had been carrying alone. Doctor, Elias said. Mayhew nodded. Elias. His voice sounded tired. Very tired. The kind of tired that lived inside a man longer than sleep could fix. Elias looked toward the skeleton. You said it is 6 years old. The doctor hesitated. Then nodded. Yes. Voss immediately stepped forward. Doctor, perhaps we shouldn't make assumptions before proper examination. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Mayhew's jaw tightened. The reaction was tiny. But real. Ren saw it. So did Elias. The doctor looked directly at Voss. For once. Harlan. Mort met not making assumptions. The banker smiled. Too quickly. Of course. No. Not of course. Something was wrong. Ren crouched near the exposed bank. Not touching. Only observing. The clothing scraps interested her. The boot interested her. But the soil interested her most. Because she had spent enough years around livestock burials, fence posts, root systems, and erosion to know one thing. Ground remembered. And this ground remembered something strange. She looked closer. Very close. Then blinked. Elias. His attention shifted immediately. He crouched beside her. She pointed. The roots above the skeleton. One major root passed directly over the ribcage. Healthy. Undisturbed. Older than the burial. Much older. The realization hit simultaneously. Elias inhaled sharply. Dr. Mayhew noticed. What? Ren stood slowly. The body wasn't buried. The crowd fell silent. Voss' smile disappeared. Dr. Mayhew stepped forward. Ren pointed toward the root. If the body had been buried under that root 6 years ago, the root would have grown around it. Nobody spoke. The doctor looked. Then looked again. Then crouched. His eyes widened. Good Lord. There it was. Confirmation. The skeleton had been moved. Recently. Or at least years after death. Not originally buried in this location. The crowd erupted into whispers. Voss stepped forward immediately. That S speculation. No, Mayhew said. The Dr. S voice had changed. Firm now. Certain. She S correct. The banker froze. Dr. Mayhew pointed toward the exposed roots. This burial occurred after root growth. The crowd grew louder. Much louder. Because ordinary people understood that. Simple truth. Visible truth. Hard truth. The most dangerous kind. Voss attempted recovery. Bodies shift. Not through tree root. Flew. Didn't place clothing beneath intact root structures. The doctor stood. For the first time since Ren had met him. He looked angry. Actually angry. Interesting. Very interesting. Because guilt often produced exhaustion. Conscience sometimes produced anger. And Dr. Mayhew seemed to have both. Voss realized he was losing ground. His eyes hardened. Then he changed strategy. Even if the body was moved, he said smoothly, that proves nothing regarding Silas Cord. Ren watched him carefully. Because he was right. Technically, the body proved movement. Not identity. Not yet. The banker knew exactly where certainty ended. That was where he liked to live. Dr. Mayhew stepped toward the skeleton. Then stopped. His hands shook. Just slightly. Enough. Ren saw it. The doctor was carrying something. A memory. A secret. A mistake. Something. Then Mayhew did something unexpected. He removed his glasses, closed his eyes, and said quietly, Mott never believed those bones belonged to Silas. The creek valley went completely silent. No wind. No whispers. Nothing. Every person present stared at him. Elias looked like he'd been struck. What? The word barely escaped. Mayhew opened his eyes. I signed the identification. Nobody moved. The doctor continued. The sheriff wanted closure. His voice sounded hollow. The town wanted closure. A pause. Harlan wanted closure. The banker immediately stepped forward. Careful. Doctor. But Mayhew ignored him. Years of something were breaking loose. Years of pressure. Years of compromise. Years of regret. Mort told them there wasn't enough evidence. Silence. Mort told them the remains were too damaged. Silence. Mort told them certainty wasn't possible. The Doctor's eyes found Elias. And I signed any. The words landed like stones. Elias didn't move. Could T. Ren understood. This wasn't just information. This was grief changing shape. 6 years of grief. 6 years of certainty. Suddenly unstable. Mayhew looked older now. Much older. Mott was wrong, he said quietly. No, Voss snapped. The sharpness shocked everyone. Even himself. The banker recovered instantly. Too late. Everyone had heard it. Everyone. Mayhew looked at him. Then something remarkable happened. The Doctor's fear disappeared. Not entirely, but enough. 6 years of carrying a mistake had finally become heavier than the consequences of admitting it. Mott was wrong, he repeated. Then he pointed toward the skeleton. And if this body was to originally buried here, he looked directly at Elias. Then we need to consider a possibility nobody wanted to consider 6 years ago. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The Doctor swallowed, then said the words. Silas Cord may have survived the fire. Nobody spoke for a long time. The creek continued rushing over stone. A crow called somewhere above the ridge. The world moved. The people did not. Silas Cord may have survived the fire. The sentence hung over North Ridge Creek like storm clouds refusing to break. Elias stood motionless. Not because he believed it. Not because he rejected it. Because grief had suddenly lost its shape. For 6 years he had mourned a dead brother. Now a doctor stood before him saying the death itself might never have happened. How did a man react to that? Ren watched his face carefully. Shock came first. Then hope. Then fear. Because hope was dangerous. Especially after 6 years. Dr. Mayhew seemed to understand. His shoulders sagged. Mort don't know that he survived, he said quietly. But Mott never had proof he died. The distinction mattered. The crowd murmured. Some people looked stunned. Others looked fascinated. A few looked frightened, because if Silas Cord had survived, then someone had built 6 years of legal claims on a lie. Harlan Voss recovered first. Of course he did. Men like him practiced recovery the way blacksmiths practiced hammer strikes. Let's not lose perspective, he said smoothly. Dr. Mayhew is merely acknowledging uncertainty. Nobody answered. The banker continued. The possibility is T evidence. Ren looked at him. Interesting. Very interesting. Because he wasn't arguing against the idea. He was arguing against investigation. Subtle difference. Important difference. The crowd didn't catch it. Ren did. Dr. Mayhew did too. The Doctor's eyes narrowed. The banker turned. Why were you so eager to close the matter? Silence. Dangerous silence. The kind that preceded irreversible things. Voss smiled politely. The town needed answers. You mean the bank needed title clarity? The crowd stirred. Voss's smile tightened. Land ownership required resolution. There was no urgency. There was to Elias. The Doctor's expression hardened. No. A pause. Not to Elias. The creak seemed louder suddenly. Mayhew stepped forward. It was urgent to you. The accusation landed hard. Not because it proved anything. Because it came from a man who had spent 6 years avoiding conflict. Everyone knew it. Everyone. The quiet doctor. The careful doctor. The doctor who rarely spoke against anyone. If he was speaking now. People listened. Voss realized it too. For the first time since Ren had met him, a tiny crack appeared in his control. Small, but real. Perhaps, he said carefully. We should continue this discussion somewhere more appropriate. No, Elias said. The mountain man's voice cut through everything. Not loud, not angry. Certain. The crowd fell silent immediately. Elias looked at Dr. Mayhew. Tell me everything. The doctor's face went pale. Not from fear. From memory. Yes, the answer came instantly. No hesitation. No uncertainty. 6 years of grief deserve truth. Even ugly truth. Especially ugly truth. Mayhew looked toward the creek. Toward the skeleton. Toward the gathered townspeople. Then finally toward Voss. Something settled inside him. A decision. A hard one. Mort received a call the morning after the fire. Nobody moved. The sheriff woke me before dawn. His voice sounded distant, like a man walking backward through his own life. We rode to the cabin together. A pause. The structure had collapsed. Another pause. The remains were found near the centre. Elias stood perfectly still. Mayhew continued. Too damaged for proper identification. Silence. Mott said silence. Mott wrote it down. Silence. Then Sheriff Pike asked me to reconsider. The crowd shifted uneasily. Nobody liked where this was going. Ren watched Voss. The banker had gone very still. Very still. Mayhew continued. He said the family deserved certainty. A bitter smile touched the doctor's mouth. Funny thing about certainty. Nobody spoke. The doctor looked at Elias. Mott wanted to help. There it was. The mistake. Not greed. Not corruption. Weakness. Different sin. Same damage. Mott convinced myself probability was enough. His voice broke slightly. I sighed. The words hung in the air. Raw. Honest. Painful. Elias didn't respond. Could tea. Ren understood. The mountain man was processing information anymore. He was rebuilding memory. Every funeral. Every winter. Every lonely year. Everything now required re-examination. That took time. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Vale arrived. Fast. Faster than anyone expected from a woman her age. She came down the trail carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. The moment she entered the clearing, she looked directly at Elias. Not at the skeleton. Not at Voss. Elias. Good, she said. You re-still him. Nobody knew how to answer that. Mrs. Vale rarely seemed interested in ordinary conversation. She marched straight toward them, then stopped. Her eyes landed on the skeleton. Something changed. Not shock. Recognition. The old woman frowned. Then frowned harder. Then took 3 more steps. The crowd parted automatically. People moved. Mrs. Vale crouched near the exposed remains. Looked carefully. Very carefully. Then looked at the boot. The single weathered boot still attached to one leg. The old woman blinked. Once. Twice. Then stood up. The word cut through the clearing. Everybody looked at her. Mrs. Vale pointed. That isn't Silas. Dead silence. Voss immediately stepped forward. Dante Margaret me. The old woman didn't even look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the skeleton. That is T. Silas. Elias stared. How do you... Mrs. Vale pointed at the boot. Because Mott bought those boots. Nobody spoke. The creek rushed below. The wind moved through the pines. Everything else stopped. Mort bought them for Jeremiah Tucker. The name meant nothing to Ren. But it meant something to several people in the crowd. Whispers erupted immediately. Voss looked annoyed. Not surprised. Annoyed. Interesting. Very interesting. Elias frowned. Jeremiah Tucker worked the mine. Mrs. Vale nodded. Lived West Ridge. Disappeared 4 years ago. The whispers grew louder. Ren listened. Missing miner. Nobody found. Debt problems. Heavy drinker. Several fragments emerged from the crowd, enough to create a rough picture. Mrs. Vale pointed again. Mott remember because he complained about the left boot. She folded her arms. Said it rubbed his ankle. The old woman looked at Mott for the exposed remains. That repair patch is mine. The clearing exploded into conversation. Not panic. Not chaos. Recognition. Memory. People talking. Comparing. Remembering. Exactly what Voss didn't want. Ren saw it happen. The banker realized it too. Control was slipping. Not because of evidence. Because of discussion. Truth spread through communities before it reached courtrooms. People had started thinking. Dangerous development. Very dangerous. Then Ren noticed something. The young bank clerk. The same one from the cabin ruins. He had arrived during the commotion. Standing near the edge of the crowd. Watching. Sweating. Terrified. His eyes weren't on the skeleton. Or Elias. Or Voss. They were on Mrs. Vale S. oilcloth bundle. Interesting. Very interesting. Ren stepped slightly sideways, blocking his view. The young man immediately adjusted position, trying to see around her. There it was. Confirmation. The bundle mattered. A lot. Mrs. Vale noticed too. The old woman followed the clerk's gaze, then looked down at the package in her hand. Her expression changed. Just slightly. Enough. She knew. Whatever she carried mattered, and somebody wanted it. Badly. The old woman walked toward Elias. Slowly. Deliberately. Every eye in the clearing followed. She stopped directly in front of him, then held out the oilcloth bundle. Mort went home after town. Nobody spoke. Mott remembered something. The package looked old. Heavy. Carefully wrapped. Elias took it. What? Mrs. Vale's eyes flicked toward Voss. The banker had gone completely expressionless, which somehow looked worse than anger. Then the old woman answered. The last thing Silas ever gave me. The clearing fell silent again. Elias stared at the bundle. His hands trembled. Just slightly. The mountain man looked smaller suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a younger brother again. Not a landowner. Not a husband. Not a fighter. Just a man holding a ghost. What is it? He asked quietly. Mrs. Vale looked toward the ridge. Toward the burned cabin. Toward 6 years of lies. Then back at him. He told me never to open it. A pause. Unless someone tried to steal your land. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The old woman swallowed. Yesterday was the first time Mott believed that day had finally come. Slowly untied the oilcloth. The crowd leaned forward. Even Voss. Especially Voss. Layer by layer the wrapping came away. Old cloth. Wax paper. Leather. Then épineux-le-le. A ledger. Blue. Worn. Weathered. But intact. The blue ledger. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The blue ledger sat in Elias Cord's hands like a live coal. For 6 years it had existed only as a rumour. A possibility. A story carried by grief and suspicion. Now it was real. Weathered. Worn. Heavy. And every person in the clearing knew it. The creek seemed quieter. Even the wind had fallen away. Ren watched Harlan Voss. Not the ledger. The banker. Because evidence mattered. But reactions mattered too. Voss's face remained perfectly controlled. Too controlled. His eyes never left the blue cover. Not once. There. Confirmation. The ledger was genuine. If it were worthless, he would have looked bored. Instead, he looked hungry. Dangerously hungry. Mrs. Vale folded her arms. Go on. Elias looked at her. You never opened. Not one. He made me. The old woman shrugged. Mort broken many promises in my life. A pause. Just not that one. The crowd edged closer. Deputy Pritch immediately stepped between them and Elias. Interesting. The deputy had finally chosen a side. Not publicly. Not completely. But enough. Ren noticed. So did Voss. Neither commented. Elias slowly opened the ledger. The leather creaked. Pages yellowed with age appeared beneath his fingers. Dense handwriting. Columns. Dates. Names. Transfers. Exactly what Silas had described. The first page contained a single sentence written in larger script. If you rereading this, something happened before Mort could finish. The clearing went silent. Completely silent. Elias stared. His fingers tightened on the cover. Mrs. Vale looked away. The sentence felt personal. Too personal for spectators. Yet nobody left. Because everybody understood. The dead had just spoken. Across 6 years. Across a fire. Across lies. The dead had spoken. Elias turned the page. Numbers filled the next sheet. Loans. Property transfers. Tax filings. Debt purchases. Ordinary entries. At first glance. Then Ren stepped closer. Very close. Her eyes moved down the columns. And stopped. There. Elias looked. What's wrong? She pointed. Same debt. The crowd couldn't see from where they stood. Voss could. The banker immediately shifted position. Trying to read. Trying to estimate damage. Trying to calculate. Ren continued. Same account appears 3 times. Elias frowned. 3 different balances. Now the mountain man understood. His eyes narrowed. The same debt. 3 versions. 3 totals. Impossible. Unless someone wanted different numbers shown to different people. Ren turned another page. Then another. Then another. The pattern repeated. Again. And again. And again. Properties transferred through inflated debt. Loans marked unpaid despite receipt. Settlements erased. Replacement notes issued. Fraud. Systematic fraud. Years of it. The crowd sensed the change. Whispers spread. People didn't understand every number. They understood the faces reading them. And those faces looked alarmed. Very alarmed. Deputy Pritch stepped closer. Can Mott see? Elias handed him the ledger. The deputy examined several pages. Then his expression darkened. Jesus. Nobody laughed. Nobody corrected him. Because everyone knew that was T-profanity. That was realization. The dangerous kind. Pritch looked up. My father, Snow. Silence. He flipped pages, found another entry, then another. His breathing changed. My father's note was paid. Nobody spoke. The deputy looked toward Voss. Not angry. Worse. Certain. It was. The crowd shifted. People looked at one another, 'cause now it was just Elias. Or Silas. Or a mountain dispute. Now it touched somebody else. That was how movements started. Not with proof. With recognition. Voss understood immediately. The banker stepped forward. Deputy! No. The interruption shocked everyone. Pritch had never spoken to Voss that way. Never. The deputy's face had gone pale. My father. A pause. You took the farm anyway. Dead silence. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were listening. Dangerous transition. Very dangerous. Because listeners became witnesses. And witnesses became problems. Voss changed tactics instantly. Anyone can write numbers in a book. Interesting. Ren almost admired the speed. Not deny the ledger existed. Question authenticity. Correct strategy. If he had time. Which he didn't he. Because Mrs. Vale immediately stepped forward. That's Silas's hand. Several townspeople nodded. Yes. Looks like his writing. Definitely. The confirmations came quickly. Too quickly for Voss to stop. Memory had joined the conversation. That was hard to cross-examine. The banker looked toward Dr. Mayhew, seeking support. Instead, the doctor reached for the ledger. Elias handed it over. Mayhew examined several pages, then stopped. His face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Real recognition. The doctor turned back several pages. Then several more. Then found something. Something specific. Something devastating. Oh no. The words escaped before he could stop them. The crowd leaned forward. What? Elias asked. Mayhew looked sick. Actually sick. The doctor swallowed hard. Then showed the page. Medical payments. Treatment records. Vaccination supplies. Medicine shipments. Ordinary entries. Except for one name. Dr. Mayhew. Repeated. Repeated often. Repeated with notes. The doctor's hands trembled. What is it? Ren asked. Mayhew looked at her. Then toward Voss. Then back toward the ledger. Finally he answered. These aren't medical debts. Silence. The doctor pointed towards several entries. These are Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody blinked. The creek continued rushing through the valley. Everything else stopped. Mayhew's voice cracked. Harlan paid me. The banker froze. Years of control. Years of certainty. Years of manipulation. All suddenly balanced on one terrible moment. The doctor looked shattered. Mort told myself they were consulting fees. A pause. Professional compensation. A pause. Review payment. The words sounded pathetic now. Weak. Transparent. The excuses of a man who had spent years negotiating with his conscience. Then came the truth. Mott knew better. The crowd erupted. Not shouting. Not yet. Shock. Pure shock. People talking over each other. Asking questions. Remembering things. Connecting events. Exactly what Voss feared. The banker stepped forward. That S absurd. His voice was sharp now. The polish cracking. These are assumptions. Mayhew looked directly at him. Not anymore. The doctor's fear was gone. Completely gone. Sometimes people reached a point where consequences stopped mattering. Mayhew had arrived there. 6 years late, but arrived. The doctor held up the ledger. You paid me after the fire. Silence. You paid me before I signed. Silence. You paid me after I signed. The crowd grew quieter, because certainty had entered the conversation, and certainty changed things. Voss looked around. Calculating. Always calculating. Ren saw it happen. The banker wasn't trying to win anymore. He was looking for exits. Interesting. Very interesting. Then she noticed something else. The young clerk, the nervous one, standing near the edge of the crowd, sweating, terrified, his eyes fixed on the ledger. Not Voss. The ledger. Fear. Pure fear. Then he made a mistake. A tiny mistake. He started backing away. Ren saw it immediately. So did Mrs. Vale. And unexpected, so did Deputy Pritch. The deputy pointed. The young man froze. Too late. Every eye turned toward him. The clerk swallowed. Hard. What? Nobody believed the innocence. Nobody. Pritch stepped forward. You seem nervous. The crowd chuckled darkly. Bad moment for nervousness. Very bad. The clerk looked toward Voss instinctively. Another mistake. A worse one. Because now everybody saw it. Everybody. The banker remained expressionless. The clerk looked abandoned. And realized it. The realization hit visibly. The young man's face changed. Fear becoming resentment. Interesting. Very interesting. Ren recognized the moment. People stayed loyal while they believed protection existed. Remove protection. Loyalty became expensive. The clerk looked at the ledger. Then at Voss. Then back at the ledger. Decision point. Ren saw it happen. Right there. The exact second. The young man reached into his coat. Half the crowd tensed. Deputy Pritchhand moved toward his revolver. The clerk froze. Then slowly with a folded paper. Not a weapon. A document. Several documents. Actually, his hand shook violently. Voss's expression changed for the first time all day. Not anger. Not irritation. Fear. Real fear. The young clerk looked at the banker. Years of obedience visible in his face. Years of compromise. Years of swallowing things he should have swallowed. Then he spoke. Quietly. Mott kept copies. The creak seemed to stop. The world seemed to stop. Everything stopped. The clerk swallowed. Again. Then held up the papers. Mort kept copies of everything. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. The young man looked directly at Harlan Voss, and finally said the sentence he should have said years ago. You told me nobody would ever ask. The silence after those words felt heavier than thunder. Mort kept copies of everything. The young clerk stood in the centre of the crowd with trembling hands and a stack of folded papers that suddenly seemed more dangerous than any rifle in Mercy Ridge. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved. Even Harlan Voss had gone still. Not the stillness of control. The stillness of calculation. The banker looked at the documents. Then at the clerk. Then at the deputy. Then at the crowd. Ren saw the realization happen behind his eye. Too many witnesses. Too many ears. Too many people already questioning old stories. Whatever happened next would spread beyond the creek before sunset. That changed everything. The young clerk swallowed hard. His name, Ren realized suddenly, was something nobody had bothered to mention. A useful thing about power. Power often ignored the names of people beneath it. She looked at him. "What's your name?" The question startled him. Your... The young man blinked, then answered. Thomas. 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 Several people exchanged looks. Interesting. Very interesting. Deputy Pritch frowned. Judge Bell's nephew. Thomas nodded. The crowd stirred. That mattered. More than it seemed. Ren filed it away. Family connections explained employment. Employment explained access. Access explained copies. Everything connected if you looked long enough. Thomas looked down at the papers. Mort vi kepietna supposed to keep them. No one spoke. Mot can no vi kept. His voice shook. But things didn't matter. A pause. At first I thought Mott was making mistakes. Another pause. Then Mott thought maybe everyone already knew. The crowd remained silent. Thomas laughed once. A terrible laugh. Thin. Broken. Then Mott realized everyone did know. His eyes found Elias. Then Ren. Then Dr. Mayhew. And after a while Mott got scared. There it was. Fear. The true currency of Mercy Ridge. Not dollars. Not deeds. Fear. Thomas held up the papers. Mott copied everything before it disappeared. Voss finally moved. One step. Only one. But enough. The clerk flinched. Years of habit. Years of obedience. Years of authority. Visible in a single movement. Voss softened his voice. Dangerous tactic. Think carefully. The crowd watched. Nobody interrupted. The banker continued. You re-upset. Thomas said nothing. You've misunderstood ordinary accounting procedures. Nobody believed that. Not even Voss. Ren could tell. The banker wasn't speaking to the crowd. He was speaking to Thomas. Trying to pull him back. Trying to restore the old hierarchy. The old fear. The old obedience. Bring those papers here, Voss said gently. Thomas looked at the documents. Then at the banker. Then at the crowd. And something finally broke. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way ice breaks beneath snow. You told me that. Voss froze. Thomas' voice strengthened slightly. You always said. The clerk laughed again. Bring them here. Don't worry. Mutluklunk handle it. A pause. Everything always disappeared after that. The Creek Valley remained silent. Nobody rescued Voss. Nobody came to his defense. Because too many people had heard too many similar stories. The banker realized it. Ren saw the moment. The exact second. For the first time in years, Harlan Voss stood alone. Thomas held out the papers. Not to Voss. To Deputy Pritch. The deputy hesitated. Only briefly. Then took them. The crowd exhaled collectively. Something had shifted. Pritch unfolded the first page. His eyes moved quickly. Then widened. Jesus. Again. Not profanity. Recognition. He looked at Elias. Then at Dr. Mayhew. Then at Mrs. Vale. Finally he held up one sheet. Property transfer records. The crowd leaned closer. Pritch continued reading. Original debt amount $182. A pause. Revised debt amount $740. Another pause. Collateral seizure approved. The deputy looked up. Same property. Murmurs spread. Not confusion. Understanding. Most people in Mercy Ridge had borrowed money at some point. Most understood the difference between 182 and 740. Very well. Pritch turned another page. Then another. Then another. Every page told the same story. Inflated debt. Altered balances. Vanishing payments. Seized property. Again. And again. And again. A pattern. A system. Not mistakes. Never mistakes. Ren watched faces in the crowd. Recognition spreading. People remembering old transactions. Old disputes. Old losses. Old explanations that suddenly sounded different. Dangerous moment. Very dangerous. Because truth rarely arrived alone. It brought memory with it. Then Thomas said something nobody expected. The crowd turned. The young clerk looked pale. Terrified. Resolved. A dangerous combination. What more? Pritch asked. Thomas swallowed. Then pointed toward the blue ledger. Silas was collecting evidence against land fraud. Silence. Not a rid. Nobody moved. Thomas looked at Elias. He was investigating railroad contracts. Ren felt a chill run through her. There it was. The Western Timber Line. The surveyors. The disputed land. Everything suddenly shifted. Elias frowned. Railroad? Thomas nodded. The Northern Ridge Extension. The name meant nothing to most people. But it meant something to Voss. The banker visibly tensed. Confirmation. Immediate confirmation. Thomas continued. The railroad wanted a pass through North Ridge. Nobody spoke. The easiest route crossed Cordland. Silence. The creak seemed louder again, because now motive had shape. Not debt. Not taxes. Not inheritance confusion. Land. Valuable land. Strategic land. Railroad land. The kind that transformed fortunes. Thomas looked at Elias. Silas discovered Voss was buying property before the railroad announced. Ren understood immediately. Insider information. The oldest fraud. The most profitable fraud. Buy low. Hide the reason. Sell high. Simple. Brutal. Common. Deadly. The crowd didn't understand every detail. They understood enough. Railroads meant money. Lots of money. Mrs. Vale muttered something unkind under her breath. Dr. Mayhew closed his eyes. Elias stood motionless, then asked the most important question. How much? Thomas looked down, then answered. 20 times current value. The valley erupted. Not shouting. Shock. Pure shock. Because now people understood. Not a few farms. Not a few debts. A fortune. An enormous fortune. Big enough to kill for. Ren looked at Voss. The banker had stopped trying to appear calm. Not visibly. Most people wouldn't notice. She did. The tiny changes. The rigid shoulders. The tightened jaw. The careful breathing. The man was cornered. And he knew it. Then something happened. Something small. Something almost invisible. Voss looked toward the tree line. Only for a second. A glance. Nothing more. Most people missed it. Ren didn't he. Neither did Elias. Their eyes met briefly. Both understood. Danger. Immediate danger. Because trapped men sometimes became desperate. And desperate men rarely acted alone. Ren turned slightly. Scanning the ridge. The trees. The rocks. The shadows. Nothing. Movement. Very small. Halfway up the slope. A flash of metal. Gone instantly. But real. Very real. Ren's stomach tightened. Rifle barrel. Someone was positioned above the creek. Watching. Waiting. Not a coincidence. Not today. Not here. She stepped closer to Elias. Don T reacted. The mountain man didn't even look at her. Good. Right. Silence. Upper. Elias remained perfectly still. Only his eyes shifted slightly. Enough. He saw it. The hidden position. The danger. The trap. The realization passed between them instantly. Somebody had prepared for this. Not for fraud exposure. For witnesses. For testimony. For loose ends. The crowd remained focused on Thomas. On the papers. On Voss. Nobody else noticed. Ren scanned again. Another flash. Different location. Her blood ran cold. Not one rifle. Two. She touched Elias's sleeve lightly. A pause. Maybe the mountain man's face didn't change, but she felt tension move through him. Dangerous tension. Controlled. Barely. Then Thomas said something else. Something important. Something that pulled everyone's attention even further away from the ridges. Mott know where the original railroad contract. Dead silence. The hidden rifle barrel flashed again. This time closer. And Ren suddenly understood exactly why someone was preparing to kill. The moment stretched thin. Too thin. Like rope before it snapped. Thomas Bell stood in the center of the creek valley holding years of secrets in trembling hands. Mort know where the original railroad contracts are. The crowd stared. Nobody noticed the ridge. Nobody noticed the hidden rifles. Nobody except Ren and Elias. And whoever held those rifles knew it, which meant time had just become the most valuable thing in the valley. Ren scanned the upper slope again. There. A shadow between two pines. Not moving now. Waiting. Professional enough to stay still. Not professional enough to disappear completely. The second position sat farther west behind a cluster of cedar roots. The third she had only glimpsed once. Maybe there. Maybe not. Either way, 2 rifles were enough. More than enough. Thomas continued speaking. They weren't T-filed through the county office. Nobody interrupted him. They were routed through private holding agreements. The clerk swallowed. Temporary ownership transfers. Voss's face hardened. Tom, the young man flinched again. Years of obedience. Still there. Still fighting. But weaker now. Thomas looked toward the banker. Then away. The word surprised even him. The crowd felt it. A small victory. But real. Thomas continued. Several properties were purchased before survey results became public. Ren watched the ridge. The rifle barrel shifted slightly. Tracking. Measuring. Selecting. She understood. The shooter wasn't waiting for the crowd. He was waiting for a target. A specific target. Thomas. Maybe Elias. Possibly both. Anyone who could connect the railroad contracts to the fraudulent land acquisitions. Anyone who could prove motive. That was the problem with conspiracies. The deeper they went, the more expensive witnesses became. Ren stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between Thomas and the western slope. Instinct. Not strategy. Just instinct. Elias noticed. His eyes flickered toward her, then toward the ridge, then back. He understood. The mountain man shifted too. Subtle. Enough. Protecting without announcing it. Protecting without making her helpless. Ren noticed. She always noticed. Thomas took a shaky breath. The contracts were stored separately. Deputy Pritch looked up. Where? The clerk hesitated. Fear returned immediately. Not fear of Voss. Different fear. Fear of naming the place. Fear of making something irreversible. Then Thomas answered. In the old survey office. Nobody reacted. Most people did know what that meant. Elias did. So did Mrs. Vale. And surprising, Dr. Mayhew. Ren saw all three faces change. Interesting. Very interesting. What survey office? Pritch asked. Mrs. Vale answered first. The abandoned railroad camp. The deputy blinked. Up near Granite Pass? Yes. Silence. The old woman looked grim. Hasn't been used in years. Thomas nodded. Most people forgot it existed. Not everyone, Ren said quietly. Thomas looked at her. Then nodded. Not every... The rifle barrel flashed again. Closer. Much closer. The shooter was adjusting position. Ren's pulse quickened. Danger was no longer theoretical. Not even close. Then Dr. Mayhew spoke. The survey office burned. Thomas immediately shook his head. Part of it. A pause. The records room survived. The doctor's eyes widened. How do you... Thomas laughed once. Bitterly. Because I delivered copies there. The Creek Valley grew silent again. Every answer created three more questions. Every revelation exposed deeper layers. The structure beneath Mercy Ridge was finally visible. And it was rotten. Voss understood exactly how bad things had become. The banker suddenly smiled. The change startled Ren. Not because of the smile itself. Because of its timing. Men smiled when they thought they still had options. Interesting. Very interesting. Then Voss spoke. Tom. The clerk froze. The banker folded his hands calmly. Too calmly. You've worked for me 6 years. Nobody interrupted. Mort taught you bookkeeping. Silence. Mort paid your wages. Silence. Mort helped your mother after your father's death. Thomas looked miserable. The crowd shifted uneasily. Because this part was true. Probably. That was how men like Voss operated. Rarely through pure evil. Mostly through obligation. Debt. Favour. Gratitude. Control wrapped in kindness. Voss continued. Mott know you refright. A pause. Understand. Another pause. But you reconfused. There it was. The rescue attempt. Not legal. Emotional. Pull the witness back. Restore the relationship. Remind him who he used to be. The banker looked almost paternal. Almost. Thomas looked down. His hands trembled. The papers shook. For one terrible second Ren thought it might work. Then Thomas whispered something. Too quietly to hear. What? Voss asked. Thomas looked up. Tears stood in his eyes. You always say that. The banker froze. The clerk laughed softly. Broken. Exhausted. Every time. A pause. Every single time. The crowd remained silent. Thomas looked at the documents. Then at Voss. You told my father he was confused. Silence. You told Deputy Pritch father he was confused. Silence. You told Mrs. Vale's husband he was confused. Silence. The young man Ev voice strengthened. You told everybody they were confused. The words landed harder than accusations, because they sounded true. Simple truth. Recognizable truth. Community truth. The kind people carried around for years without naming. Voss's expression changed. Not much. Enough. The old strategy had failed. Completely. The banker realized it. Ren saw the exact second. And unfortunately, so did the shooters. The first rifle fired. The sound cracked across the valley like lightning. Everything exploded into motion. People screamed. Horses reared. Someone dropped into the mud. Deputy Pritch shouted. The crowd scattered instinctively. Ren turned toward Thomas. Too late. The bullet struck the stack of papers in his hand. Paper burst outward. Sheets flew everywhere. Thomas staggered backward. Not hit. The documents had taken the shot. For one stunned second nobody understood what had happened. Then the second rifle fired. This time everyone understood. Chaos erupted. Men dove for cover. Women pulled children down. The creek valley transformed instantly from courtroom to battlefield. Down, Elias roared. The mountain man grabbed Ren's arm. Not dragging. Pulling her toward the bank. Toward cover. A third shot cracked through the trees. A wagon wheel exploded. Splinters flew. People screamed again. Deputy Pritch drew his revolver. "Ridge!" he shouted. "Upper ridge!" The shooters immediately shifted position. Professional. Fast. Prepared. Not random gunmen. Not frightened ranch hands. Prepared. Voss had gone to ground behind a boulder. Interesting. Very interesting. The banker wasn't surprised. Not even slightly. Confirmation. Massive confirmation. Ren hit the creek bank beside Elias. Mud. Roots. Cover. Thomas collapsed nearby, clutching the shredded papers. Deputy Pritch crawled toward him. Dr. Mayhew dragged Mrs. Veil behind a fallen log. The entire valley had become a maze of panic. Then Ren saw something. Not the shooters. Not the crowd. The papers. The bullet had torn through the stack. Most pages scattered, but one page remained pinned against Thomas' chest, held there by the force of impact. Ren crawled closer. "What are you doing?" Elias shouted. She ignored him. The page mattered. Instinct told her so. She reached Thomas. The young clerk looked shocked. Alive. Barely processing. Ren grabbed the pinned sheet. Pulled it free. Then stared. The page was T bookkeeping. Not exactly. It was a contract. A railroad contract. Original. Signed. And one name sat at the bottom. Not Harlan Voss. Not Thomas Bell. Not any railroad executive. The signature belonged to someone else. Someone nobody expected. Ren felt her stomach drop. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Then another shot slammed into the bank above her head. Wood exploded. Elias grabbed her shoulder. Moo! Ren held on to the contract. Even as chaos consumed the valley. Even as bullets cracked through the trees. Even as people screamed and scrambled for safety. Because she had just discovered something worse than corruption. Something worse than fraud. Something that explained everything. Everything. The fire. The false debt. The forged signatures. The body. The railroad land. Silas. All of it. The signature at the bottom of the original railroad agreement. Sheriff Orrin Pike. The name hit Ren harder than the gunfire. Sheriff Orrin Pike. Not listed as witness. Not listed as investigator. Not listed as law enforcement. A signer. A participant. A beneficiary. The original railroad agreement trembled in her hand. Everything suddenly aligned. Not neatly. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to reveal the shape hiding underneath 6 years of lies. Another rifle shot cracked overhead. Mud sprayed across the creek bank. Elias grabbed Ren's coat collar and pulled her behind a fallen cedar trunk. "Are you—" "No." "Shh." Mott said no. The mountain man looked at her once. Then nodded. Trust. Simple. Immediate. Earned. The kind that mattered. Deputy Pritch crawled toward them with Thomas Bell pressed low behind him. The young clerk's face had gone white as flour. One side of his coat was shredded where the bullet had passed through the papers. 6 inches closer and he would have been dead. Maybe less. Thomas knew it. Everybody knew it. "Thomas," Ren said. The young man looked up. His eyes were wide. Terrified. "Do you recognize this signature?" She showed him the contract. Thomas stared. Then went pale. Paler. Impossible. Ren would have thought, if she wasn't watching it happen. "Oh." Deputy Pritch leaned over. Saw the page. Then froze. For 1 second, the deputy stopped breathing. The word barely escaped. His voice sounded hollow. "My father always said Pike and Voss were close." Another shot struck the cedar log. Wood exploded. Everyone ducked. The shooters were repositioning, trying to pin the crowd down, trying to buy time, trying to recover something, or someone. Ren looked across the valley. Harlan Voss remained behind the boulder. Protected. Careful. Watching. Not fleeing. Interesting. Very interesting. Because innocent men usually fled from gunfire. Guilty men sometimes stayed to see whether the clean-up succeeded. Then Elias pointed. Ren followed his gaze. One of the rifle positions had shifted. The shooter was moving downhill. Not away. Toward them. Toward Thomas. Of course. The witness. Always the witness. Deputy Pritch saw it too. His revolver came up immediately. "Tom." The clerk looked up. "Stay behind." "Stay behind." No hesitation now. No uncertainty. The deputy had chosen. Fully. Completely. The choice had finally cost more than avoiding it. And somehow that made him stronger. Dr. Mayhew crawled over from the fallen log. Mud covered one sleeve. His glasses were crooked. He looked exhausted and strangely determined. Elias. The mountain man turned. The doctor swallowed. There S something else. The timing was terrible, which meant it was important. Mayhew looked toward the creek, toward the exposed skeleton, toward 6 years of guilt, then back at Elias. When the fire happened, a bullet cracked overhead. Nobody moved. The doctor continued anyway. Mott wasn't he the first person there? Silence. Even now. Even during gunfire. The sentence carried weight. "What do you mean?" Elias asked. Mayhew looked down. Ashamed. Mott arrived after Pike. The mountain man froze. The doctor continued. By several hours, the creak seemed louder again. Everything else narrowed. Focused. What did... Mayhew closed his eyes briefly. Memory. Old memory. Painful memory. Then, footprints. Nobody spoke. 2 set. A pause. One belonged to Pike. Another pause. His voice weakened. led away from the cab. Dead silence. Ren felt cold spread through her chest. Not because the information surprised her, because it confirmed something. Something enormous. The doctor looked at Elias. Mott told myself they were from rescuers. A bitter laugh escaped him. There were no rescuers. Silence. Mort knew that. Another pause. Mott just didn't want to know what it meant. The words landed hard. Because everybody understood. Footprints leaving. Not entering. Leaving. Someone had walked away from the fire. Someone alive. Someone who might have been Silas. Then the world exploded. A rifle shot rang out. Different. Closer. Followed immediately by a scream. The crowd erupted. Not panic. Shock. Pure shock. Ren looked toward the upper slope. One of the shooters had fallen, rolling downhill through brush and rock. The rifle flew from his hands. Nobody knew. Then another report echoed across the valley. Not from the ridge. From behind it. A second shooter collapsed. Silence followed. Absolute silence. The remaining gunman vanished immediately. Running. Fast. The crowd stared. Confused. Nobody understood. Then a horse appeared at the top of the ridge. Dark bay. Hard ridden. Foam on its neck. And on that horse sat a man. Broad shoulders. Dark beard. Weathered hat. A rifle resting across the saddle. The rider looked down into the valley. At the crowd. At the fallen gunman. At Harlan Voss. And finally at Elias. The world stopped. Completely. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Because Elias had gone pale. Not frightened. Not shocked. Something else. Recognition. Impossible recognition. The rider removed his hat. Slowly. Very slowly. Grey threaded through his hair now. More than before. Older. Harder. But unmistakable. Mrs. Veil made a sound. Half sob. Half prayer. Dr. Mayhew staggered backward. Deputy Pritch lowered his revolver. Thomas Bell simply stared. The rider looked directly at Elias. For a long time neither man spoke. Then the rider smiled. Small. Sad. Familiar. And said the words Elias had not heard in 6 years. Hello, little brother. The valley fell silent. Because the dead man had just come home. Silas Cord was alive. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody trusted their own eyes. Silas Cord sat astride the dark bay horse beneath a grey sky, 6 years older than the man everyone had buried. The mountains seemed to lean inward. The creek continued running. Everything else stopped. Elias stared. The world around him disappeared. The crowd. The rifles. The fraud. The railroad. All of it vanished beneath one impossible truth. His brother was alive. Silas climbed slowly from the saddle. His left leg favoured slightly. Old injury. Old damage. The sort a man learned to live with. The sort that never completely healed. He looked thinner than the photograph in the tin box. Harder too. Years of survival had carved themselves into his face. But it was him. Unmistakably him. Mrs. Vale began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quiet tears. The kind carried for years. Dr. Mayhew removed his glasses. His hands shook. Deputy Pritch looked like he had forgotten how to speak. Thomas Bell simply stared. And Harlan Voss. Harlan Voss looked terrified, truly terrified. For the first time since Ren had met him, the banker understood. This wasn't tea rumour. This was tea a ledger. This wasn't tea speculation. The witness he thought had died was standing in front of him, alive. Elias took one step forward, then another, then stopped, because grief is strange. People imagine reunions happen quickly. They do not. Sometimes 6 years of pain stand between two brothers. Sometimes certainty must die before love can move. Silas understood. Ren saw it in his eyes. The older brother waited. Patient. Quiet. Finally Elias spoke. One word. Silas closed his eyes. The question carried 6 winters, 6 birthdays, 6 years of loneliness, 6 years of mourning. Why? Silas looked at him, then answered. Because Nobody spoke. The older brother continued. Mort found the railroad A pause. Mott found the land purchases. A pause. Mott found the false debt. Silence. Mort found everything. His eyes shifted toward Voss. Then back. Mott thought evidence would be enough. A bitter smile touched his face. It wasn't. The crowd remained silent. Silas continued. They came for me before Mott could leave the mountain. Nobody moved. Pike first. The name landed heavily. Voss second. The banker visibly flinched. Small movement. Huge consequence. Silas pointed toward the ridge. The men who just tried to kill Thomas. A pause. They worked for Pike. Shock rippled through the crowd. Not surprise. Confirmation. The kind that hurts. Silas looked at Elias. The fire was supposed to kill. Dead silence. It was supposed to erase the ledger. Nobody breathed. When the cabin burned, Mott escaped through the root cellar. The words settled over the valley. Simple. Devastating. Silas continued. Mort was in. His hand touched his left side. A pause. Mrs. Calder found me. Ren frowned. The name meant nothing to her. Mrs. Vale nodded slowly. She lived beyond Granite Pass. Silas nodded. Yes. People thought she'd moved east. She let. The older brother looked toward the mountains. She. A pause. Saved my life. Another pause. Then she died 3 winters later. Silence. After that, Mort kept moving. The crowd listened. Nobody interrupted, because everybody understood now. Not every disappearance was abandonment. Sometimes survival looked like absence. Silas looked directly at Elias. Mort wanted to come home. The words broke. Just slightly. Mott tried. A pause. 3 times. Another pause. Every time Mott got close, Mott learned someone was still watching the land. The crowd slowly turned toward Voss. The banker said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, because the truth had arrived before his explanation. And truth moves faster. Silas looked toward Ren. For the first time. You re the wife. Ren nodded. Yes. The older brother smiled faintly. A pause. About time somebody helped. Several people laughed. The tension cracked slightly. Not much. Enough. Then Silas pointed toward the blue ledger. That is T, the only cop. Dead silence. Everyone turned. Silas looked at Thomas Bell. The young clerk froze, then pointed at the abandoned survey office. Original contracts are still there. A pause. Every one of the crowd inhaled collectively, because now they had it. Not suspicion. Not rumour. Evidence. Real evidence. The kind that survived courtrooms. The kind that destroyed lies. Deputy Pritch stood. Slowly. Deliberately. Then looked at Harlan Voss. "Mort met placing you under arrest." The banker laughed. Actually laughed. One sharp sound. Disbelieving. "You re-seer?" "Yeah." For the question sounded confident. "Almost." Pritch held up the blue ledger. Then the copied documents. Then the railroad contract. Then pointed towards Silas. "For start." A pause. "Conspiracy." Another pause. "Fraud." Another. "Evidence tampering." And attempted murder. The Creek Valley fell silent. Voss looked around. Searching. Calculating. Looking for allies. For support. For escape. He found none. Not one. Not any more. The crowd had already chosen. Not because Elias shouted louder. Not because Ren argued better. Not because Silas returned. Because too many people recognized their own stories in the evidence. Truth had become personal, and personal truth is almost impossible to defeat. Voss' shoulders sagged. Just slightly. The first visible crack. Then another. And another. Until suddenly he looked older. Smaller. Human. The illusion of power finally gone. Deputy Pritch stepped forward. The banker did not resist. Not because he accepted guilt. Because he finally understood something. The town was no longer afraid. And fear had always been his strongest weapon. Without he had very little left. Months later, the first snow arrived early. It settled across Northridge in soft white layers, covered old scars, softened hard edges, made everything look quieter than it really was. The railroad changed routes. The original contracts reached county investigators. Several additional arrests followed. Judge Bell resigned. New elections were held. Land seizures were reviewed. Some properties returned. Others compensated. Not every wrong could be repaired, but many could, and that mattered. The blue ledger became evidence. Then history. Then finally a reminder. One book. Enough truth. Enough courage. Sometimes that was all it took. The Cord cabin changed too. The roof was repaired before winter. The bridge received new supports. The chimney straightened. The barn doors hung properly for the first time in years. Work accumulated. Then disappeared. Day after day. Season after season. Ren never became smaller. Not physically. Not emotionally. Not socially. The town eventually stopped expecting it. That may have been her greatest victory. Children waved when she rode through Mercy Ridge. Women asked for bookkeeping advice. Ranchers sought her opinion on contracts before signing them. And nobody laughed when she walked into a room anymore. Not if they were smart. Elias changed too. Slowly. The best changes usually are. He laughed more. Not often. Enough. He spoke more. Still not much. Enough. And somewhere between repairing fences, sharing meals, arguing over supply lists, surviving winter storms, and building a life together, the partnership became love. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Earned. Exactly as it should have been. One evening near the end of winter, Ren stood on the porch watching snow drift through the pines. The cabin glowed warmly behind her. Inside, Silas and Mrs. Vale argued over a card game neither intended to finish honestly. Deputy Pritch had stopped by for coffee. Thomas Bell was helping inventory supplies. Laughter drifted through the open door. Home. Real home. The kind built rather than found. Elias stepped onto the porch beside her, 2 mugs in hand. He offered one. She took it. For a while neither spoke. The mountains stretched dark and beautiful beneath the evening sky. Finally Elias said quietly, "Remember the deep—" Ren smiled. "The laughter." "Yes." A pause. "You should know something." She looked at him. The mountain man leaned against the railing. "When Mott saw you step off that train," his voice softened. "Mott was terrified." Ren laughed. Mott thought everyone was right. The honesty surprised her. "Then a girl I knew." "It didn't he?" "Not any more." "What changed?" Elias looked toward the snow-covered ridge, then back at her. "You didn't." The answer hung between them. Simple. Perfect. True. You were exactly who you said you were. A pause. Turns out that was rarer than beauty. For once, Ren had no reply. The wind moved gently through the pines. Warm light spilled from the cabin windows. Inside, family waited. Chosen family. Earned family. The best kind. Elias lifted his mug slightly. To not shrinking. Ren smiled, then touched her mug against his. To making each other stronger. Snow drifted quietly across North Ridge. The cabin stood warm against the winter, and for the first time in a very long time, nobody inside was alone.